Chapter 1. SSV Ain Jalut raced towards New Rannoch with a Reaper hot on their heels. The Reaper was basically a giant metal octopus in space. Well, as long as you ignored the giant laser shooting eye. Every 50,000 years, thousands of Reapers appeared from the void between galaxies, wiped out all the advanced civilizations, and then left the Milky Way again. At least, that was what Commander Shepard of the SSV Normandy had claimed. But New Rannoch was home to an ancient time capsule that proved Shepard's theory. That was the good news. The bad news was that the Reaper invasion was happening right now, hence the Reaper chasing the ship. As everybody ran towards their post, Aaron and Olaf McKinley decided that the report for Admiral Hackett would have to wait. They were 12-year-old twins. How they had ended up on Ain Jalut was a whole other story that didn't matter right now. The question they had to deal with was, where could they go and not be in the way? It was Olaf who decided the answer. He put the lids on the jars of ink they had been using for their report. Then he took his sister's hand and led the way to sickbay. Dr. Telos was already getting it ready for casualties. "Can we help?" Olaf asked. The Asari doctor nodded and started giving them instructions. Captain Zara Ayers, Lieutenant Commander Thomas Rodriguez, and Staff Lieutenant John Harris had just gotten the biggest promotion of their careers. 5 minutes ago, they had only been responsible for the people aboard the Ain Jalut. Now they were the tip of the spear that was defending 22 million people. They were in CIC, studying the tactical situation. "Only one Reaper so far," Harris said. "Emphasis on the so far, Skipper." "Yeah, it's a safe bet there are more on the way," Zara said. "You think they know about one of the Prothean time capsules being intact?" Rodriguez asked. "It doesn't matter. They can't risk us finding any information that might reveal a weakness in their defenses," Zara said. "I presume we're not getting any backup," Harris said. "Nope. We never reached clear space to call the cavalry," Zara said. As she studied the tactical displays, she wondered how things could get any worse. "Omega. Vengeance." Captain Kaimas watched as the Reaper destroy the MSV Frankenstein and decided that this whole mission was big pile of Krogan droppings. It had begun so simple. Follow the Alliance ship to whoever had stolen a piece of Omega. Wait for the Alliance ship to leave. Kill whoever stole the piece of Omega and go home, but things had quickly begun to unravel. First, they had lost contact with Omega. The last distorted message they had gotten had been useless. They had only been able to make out something vague about adjutants. Next, it turned out that they lacked the firepower to execute the mission. Omega Vengeance was the flagship of a fleet of 7 pirate ships, but what they thought was a bulk freighter fitted with a cutting beam was actually a dreadnought. Somebody at the sensor monitoring station would have some explaining to do if he ever made it back to Omega. For now, however, there was the small issue of a Reaper invasion to deal with. Kaimas was standing on the bridge, trying to decide his next move. "Orders, Captain." His first officers, a Salarian called Iram, asked. Vengeance's crew was a mix of species. Kaimas was Batarian. "To hell with the original mission. Follow that frigate." He turned to communications. "And open a channel. Tell them we're working for the Systems Alliance now." "Arya will kill you when she finds out," Iram said. "If we get her fleet back in one piece, she will be too stunned to kill us." "Because we'll have pulled off a miracle," Kaimas only nodded in reply. But as the fleet followed the Reaper that was chasing the Ain Jalut, he thought that even one person surviving this would be a miracle. The Reaper called itself Avenger. It was one of 5 called in by Tiger, the Reaper that had destroyed the MSV Frankenstein. Tiger was supposed to do a quick check of this system. Then the 6 of them would crush the tiny space station of Omega before heading deeper into the Terminus systems. But then, Tiger had encountered the vessel that had burned one of the collector cruisers at Uluru, not to mention that he was now being chased by a fleet of puny beings from Omega. So Tiger had called in the others. They would follow the Omega fleet in and crush them. Amel, Valkyrie. Completing the odd chase was the AML Valkyrie. Considered woefully outdated by Asari standards, the Asari merchant liner hadn't carried passengers for 70 years. Instead, she belonged to Tyla Farka. Farka was a reporter for Thesha News Service. She had been in Afterlife at the right moment and had overheard the conversation between Arya and Captain Ayers. It had taken her weeks to infiltrate the staff of Omega's biggest nightclub, but she had pulled it off. Arya was too paranoid for standard-issue listening devices. So Tyla had needed to get creative. The solution had been very simple. She had hidden an old-fashioned tape recorder in Arya's couch. Said recorder was hardwired to a microphone so that there wouldn't be any signals for scans to detect. But the smart part was that the on-off switch was connected to a pressure pad. When Arya wanted to intimidate someone, she always sat down on a specific spot on the couch, and that was where the recorder was. So when Arya sat down, she turned on the recorder herself. Getting the tape had been the hardest part of the plan, but she had figured out when to do that as well. The whole scheme had been risky as hell, but it had yielded her several stories already. Unfortunately, Arya was beginning to take notice. So Farka had decided that trialing Ayers' ship would be a good way to kill two birds with one stone, get a story and get out of Arya's reach. Omega Vengeance and her fleet had complicated things, but she was still here. Ain Jalut being chased by one Reaper, which is chased by Arya's fleet, who are chased by 5 more Reapers, and those are chased by me. Why didn't I become a dentist like my parents wanted? Figuring it was too late to turn back now anyway, she contacted the nearest full depot on an emergency frequency and pressed the record button. Retransmit the following on all channels. Level 1 emergency, SSV Ain Jalut under attack at coordinates. The computer inserted the coordinates. This is not a joke. This is not a drill. Send reinforcements. Loop message until acknowledged. She cut the channel, then she engaged the engines and joined the chase. Chapter 2. In the shell, Rick McKinley was pushing the engines to their limit. Because of safety protocols, the FTL drive wouldn't engage inside the gas cloud, which meant they were stuck running at sublight speeds. Claudia, this is not going to end well unless we get more speed. He yelled into the intercom. The system won't let me, Rick, Sanders countered. We're as close to FTL as we can get. We're going 3 times as fast as last time. Rick grumbled. The first time through the shell had been a careful exploration, not a battle. So they had been moving at 30% light speed. Now they were clipping at 90%, but the Reaper was still closing. In sick, Harris was thinking out loud. Why isn't it shooting at us? The laser beam would travel at light speed, and since they were only 90% of the way there, Ain Jalut wouldn't be able to dodge it. That would ignite the gas, Rodriguez said. Not even a Reaper could, oh no. What? Harris asked before seeing the grin of Zara's face. Oh no. No, we can't ignite gas ourselves. We'd be crushed by the blast. But Zara was already studying the chemical analysis they had made on their first time through. To the naked eye, the whole outer shell looked identical. To chemical sensors, it was a collection of pockets of various gases. There, that methane pocket, she stabbed at the screen. That's our move. And how exactly are we going to do that? Rodriguez asked. Zara's grin grew wider as she began explaining her plan. There was not a lot of time to implement the plan, but everybody knew what to do. Ain Jalut's reaction control system used gas. After some consideration, the Alliance had gone with oxygen. Yes, there were risks, but they were risks humanity had known about for centuries. And because the gas could be stored in liquid form, it was easy to bring large amounts of it. Sanders and Zhukov were hard at work unscrewing several cylinders from the system. Won't this leave us without fuel for the RCS? Zhukov asked. Nope, Sanders said. We're only taking 8 of the 10 cylinders. And Dr. Telos had an idea. They were in engineering. The cylinders were in a special, heavily shielded compartment in the floor. Said compartment was connected to an oxygen plant in the floor of the mess hall. That plant fed the compartment and the supply of medical oxygen in sickbay. What made the system super smart was that both locations used the same model of tank. In an emergency, one of the RCS fuel tanks could be taken to sickbay. There, it could be plugged into a rig that converted it into breathable oxygen, but Telos knew it also worked in reverse. The door opened and Telos entered with Aaron and Olaf McKinley in tow. Between them, they carried 4 tanks. Are we really going to try to blow up a Reaper? Olaf asked. Yep. Zhukov said. Okay. Sanders and Zhukov finished removing the cylinders, loading them onto a cart. As they left, Barnaby and several others were hard at work installing the tanks brought down from sickbay. They arrived at the airlock behind the bridge with 1 minute left on the clock. Approaching target, Rick McKinley said, attaching our little surprise now. Zhukov took a C4 charge from his pocket, set the timer, and attached it to one of the tanks. Then he and Sanders pushed the cart into the airlock. Ready? Sanders yelled. McKinley pushed the right button. Tiger watched as the human vessel ejected something from one of its airlocks. The Reaper ignored the item, merely making a mental note to destroy it later. So the tanks were allowed to break their seals and beginning spitting their contents into the pocket of methane. The liquid oxygen turned to gas. The gases mixed and the timer on the C4 kept ticking. Because it was in the lead, Ain Jalut cleared the pocket. Tiger was not so lucky. It was still 2 minutes away from exiting when the timer hit 0, leading to instant results. The C4 exploded, sparking the oxygen and the whole pocket. A massive ball of pressure expanded through the gas cloud. McKinley knew what was coming, so he dove the ship under the plane she had been traveling on. Even with only 2 cylinders of fuel, the RCS pulled of the move with ease. The Reaper was not so lucky, taking the full blast. 2 of its tentacles were sheared right off, but it was not enough to kill the giant creature. Omega. Vengeance. Kaimas watched as the Reaper was hit. It was damaged and disoriented, but still alive. He turned to Aram. Fire all the nukes. Now, each of the pirate ships had 4 nuclear fission warheads in storage. Kaimas had ordered them loaded just in case they got the chance to use them. And now the Alliance ship had provided it. Nukes away, all 28 missiles hit the part of the Reaper that had already been damaged, but it wasn't enough. Crap, Aram said. Orders? Scatter, don't give it, and then something unexpected happened. The explosion was fading, creating an area of low pressure where the pocket had been. So now all the surrounding gas was rushing into that zone. The gas interacted, creating new chemical elements. Elements that didn't like the heat that was coming from the Reaper's wounds one bit. And burned. Spontaneous Reaper combustion? Aram said. Who cares as long as it's dead? Good point. Kaimas ordered the fleet to regroup. They had a warship to find. Chapter 3. Zara had been surprised by the nuclear detonations. The pirate fleet had been following out of sight of the short-range scanner, but their aid in killing the Reaper was welcome. The question was if they were friend or foe. McKinley's voice came for the intercom. We have an incoming transmission from the pirate fleet. Let's hear it, Lieutenant. This is Captain Kaimas of the Omega Vengeance. We're here to help. This is Captain Ayers of the SSV Ain Jalut, and since when are pirates so noble, I will not lie. We were here to get payback for that chunk of Omega that was stolen, but now it's or the Reapers, so that mission is out the window. Zara and Rodriguez exchanged looks. They both knew that they would need all the help they could get. Okay, Captain, you're with us now. Understood, Wheel. There was a pause as Kaimas spoke to somebody. Captain, we have Reaper company at the edge of scanner range. I see them. Time to go, Captain. Ain Jalut and her new acquired fleet continued their trek into the shell as Avenger, and 4 more Reapers came into range. Amel. Valkyrie. By the time Farker reached the site of Tiger's death, all that remained of the Reaper was a burned-out husk. They killed a Reaper. The ones who survived aren't going to like that. But Farka didn't care. She wanted the Reapers to lose. She wanted to life. Part of her told her to turn around. Here she was, in an outdated ship, chasing Reapers. But there were people fighting for everybody's survival. And she would make sure that their stories were not forgotten. Be brave, Tyla, be brave. She sailed past the Reaper corpse and kept going. SSV Ain Jalut. Zara was still watching the scanners in CIC. Zoe, report. We've reached the first asteroid belt. Still only 5 Reaper signatures. I've logged our first kill in the logs, ma'am. The fleet is holding a tight formation, Skipper. We're passing through at full speed. But the Reapers are slowing down. Our data is a couple of days old. Theirs is from 50,000 years ago and with the camouflage system turned off, ma'am," Harris said, doing his job as navigator. "Time to get through, Lieutenant." 15 minutes for us, at least 24 minutes for them. Good. Anything else to report, Zoe? The oxygen tanks from sickbay have been installed in the RCS fuel bay, and the oxygen plant is working at full capacity, so refuel should be complete in 43 minutes. Also, Captain Kaimas has several spare tanks for sickbay. He's offered to shuttle them over once we clear the belt. "Do it," Zara said. "We'll need sickbay at full capacity." Zara looked at the clock. These were going to be 15 very long minutes. SSV Orizaba. Orizaba's CIC was organized chaos. The Reapers were everywhere and messages were flying to and fro all over the place. Private Hank Lewis was one of several people running messages to Admiral Hackett. "Admiral, we have a status update on our Normandy-class frigates," he said, while brushing sweaty, black hair from his green eyes. "Ain Jalut has asked for reinforcement. Elalamine and Verdun are going to her aid, sir." He handed Hackett an electronic pad with the full report. Both ships had been on a shakedown cruise with skeleton crews when the Reapers invaded. "Are there any other ships responding?" "4, Admiral. A Turian cruiser, 2 Asari cruisers, and the MSV Bellerophon. A civilian ship is riding into a battle deliberately?" "Yes, sir. That's what the report says, sir." "Thank you, Private. Dismissed." Hackett got the feeling that even with ships coming to her aid, Ain Jalut would be in a fight for her life. SSV Ain Jalut. They had cleared the belt and gotten the oxygen tanks aboard. After passing through the xenon layer, they were back to the helium part of the shell. McKinley was keeping an eye on the fleet, but they were still with the Ain Jalut. The problem was that the helium was a lot more stable than the outer shell, which meant that the Reapers would be able to fire their laser if they could within range of the fleet. "Great, no pressure," McKinley said, but he knew that this was a do-or-die situation. As he did his thing, Rodriguez entered the bridge. Besides McKinley, Lieutenant Taylor and Lieutenant Mbeki were the only other 2 people in the room. Taylor was on the sensors. Mbeki was monitoring the ship's heat level. "How are we doing here?" "Still staying ahead of the bad guys so far, Commander," McKinley said. "Heat levels stable, no malfunctions on the board, sir." Mbeki added. "Good," Rodriguez said. "Any additional Reaper signatures?" "No, still reading 5 Reapers, sir," Taylor said. "Keep it up," Rodriguez said. He gave them a nod and headed back to CIC, where Harris was running things. Ayers had left to see how things were going on the other decks. Zara had checked up on sickbay. Dr. Telos had everything under control, so she was moving on to the cargo bay. The shuttle from Omega Vengeance had already gone back to her mothership. Zhukov was overseeing things as the ship's Marines were getting ready for action. "How are we doing, Chief?" "We're getting ready, Captain. If they want a fight, we'll give it to them, ma'am." "Good. Because the one reason there aren't any Reaper troop transports out there is because they don't know about the colony yet, and as soon as they do..." Zhukov nodded. He had been granted access to Shepard's reports. The Reapers zombified people into ground troops. These were called husks, but Zhukov didn't doubt that the process would also work on other species, and each species would create its own variant of monster. Hell is coming to New Rannoch. And we're going to make sure they're ready for it. "Aye, Captain." She gave him a nod and continued on her tour. Chapter 4. The trip through the helium layer had been 40 minutes of nail-biting tension, but McKinley had kept the fleet out of the Reaper's crosshairs. And this time, the passage through the second belt would be a lot easier. Zara had returned to CIC after talking to Sanders in engineering. "Friendly dreadnoughts ahead," Rodriguez said. 1 minute till passage. The Ghosts had created a passage for friendly ship. "Get us through into FTL, tell our friends to close the door behind us." "Transmitting now, Skipper." As the fleet passed through the asteroid belt, the passage was swarmed by mines behind them. They had been stored in shipping containers that were attached to the asteroids. "Time to unleash our next surprise," Harris said. "The ones the pirates had didn't do enough damage," Zara said. "Let's hope ours do more." New Rannoch's defense grid included 140 missiles. They had warheads that the locals called Mark 42, but a check of their inventory had revealed that there were 33 older warheads gathered dust in storage. Fortunately for Zara, Chief Zhukov was a big fan of old science fiction shows. Taking ideas from two shows called Babylon 5 and Stargate SG-1, he had come up with Operation Sheridan. The nuclear warheads had been placed on the asteroid with the highest percentage of element 0. Those asteroids had been moved around to create a gauntlet. If things worked as planned, the EZO would increase the size of the explosion the warheads would create. Finally, the fleet reached the other side of the fleet. As fleet jumped into FTL, now 2 dreadnoughts stronger, the Reapers began their own trip through the belt. Avenger led the group through the belt. He was angry these puny beings had killed Tiger, and they kept running. But Avenger knew that it was only a matter of time before they would be cornered, and then they would be crushed. Avenger was still thinking on how much pain he would make them experience when the first nuclear warhead exploded. All 33 Operation Sheridan warheads exploded. The element 0 did exactly what Zhukov hoped it would. It made the explosions much bigger. They created waves of energy that hit the Reapers. At first all of them seemed fine, but then space itself seemed to ripple. It snapped back into place and energy flooded the area. Avenger and 2 of the Reapers made it out, but the other 2 were too slow. They were hit again and again. Until the energy faded, and one of the Reapers was dead, while another was badly wounded, which made Avenger roar internally. And then he noticed the colony. It took only a fraction of a second for him to identify the colony as Quarians. There was no information on this colony on his star charts. But they would still put it to good use. Avenger sent a message to Typhoon, the Reaper that had been damaged. Typhoon turned and headed back towards the perimeter. He would heal and summon troop transports. The Quarian colony would be harvested. In Sick, Zara and Rodriguez watched the Reaper go. The belt was currently beyond the edge of their sensor range, but the mines had sensors of their own. Ain Jalut had dropped several communications buoys between the belt and New Rannoch. These boosted the original Ghost system and gave the Alliance ship access as well. Going for the troop transports? Rodriguez asked. Going for the troop transports, Zara said. On the bright side, our communications can't penetrate the shell, and I figure this means that theirs can't either. It brings us one step closer to leveling the playing field. Still, their chances of winning were far from good. Amel, Valkyrie. Farka didn't see the Reaper until it was practically on top of her. One moment she was cruising through a massive layer of helium, the next she was dodging a very angry Reaper. She knew it was angry because it was shooting at her, but so far she had managed to dodge its fire. She wasn't complaining, but she knew it should have been impossible. Traveling at the speed of light, the laser beam should have vaporized her in one shot. Checking her scanners, she saw that the lens of the Reaper's energy weapon was damaged. She activated the log recorder. This is Tyla Farka of the AML Valkyrie. I'm about to try something stupid. If you find this, tell my parents that I love them. And tell my sister Hera that I only trust her to take care of Tommy. She'll know what it means, Farka out. Turning the recorder off, she launched the Valkyrie's emergency buoy. Then she turned the Valkyrie towards the Reaper. The ship bobbed and weaved as the Reaper shot at her. Come on, come on, come on. Valkyrie was not a big ship. She was meant to have a crew of 6 and carry 10 passengers. To be able to evacuate 16 people, she had 4 escape pods with each having room for 4 people. The model Valkyrie carried traveled at 20% of light speed, with one exception. Escape pods launched in a pinch, so they left at 25% to clear any trouble. Almost there. She put the ship through a wild turn. Now, she pressed a big red button and the starboard pods launched. The Reaper managed to blast one of the pods, but the other hit it in the eye and exploded. While the Reaper was blinded, Farka slammed the proper buttons to launch one of the port escape pods. It curved around the ship and also hit the Reaper in its eye. Something crucial failed and the Reaper's weapon exploded. Seconds later, the Reaper itself went up. Farka had a few seconds to be happy to be alive before the pressure wave hit. The ship groaned and things exploded in other rooms. Farka barely made it into the last escape pod. "Time to go, Tyla." She launched the escape pod, and it headed deeper into the nebula. Then Valkyrie exploded, and the world went black. SSV Ain Jalut. Zara looked at New Rannoch. They had reached the planet in mere minutes. "Why didn't they chase us at FTL speed?" Harris said. "Because they don't know that we don't have any more tricks between the belt and New Rannoch," Rodriguez said. "Not to mention they're wiping out a galaxy." "They are not in a rush, Lieutenant." "McKinley, get us down to the surface," Zara said. "We need to get the chief and his team down there." "Aye, Captain," McKinley said over the intercom. Ain Jalut entered the atmosphere, but she didn't go alone. The pirate fleet launched 11 shuttles. Each was loaded with as much troops as the ships could spare. New Rannoch had an army, but they were unexperienced, so the fleet was sending down as many people as they could. There was also the local police, who were getting as many people as they could into shelters and getting ready to defend those. As for the ground-to-orbit cannons, those were being defended by the New Rannoch Navy. It was also the Navy that ran the nuclear missile sites. Finally, the Air Force ran the planet's anti-aircraft guns. All of this went through Zara's head as they approached the park they had landed in before. There was a thud as the ship touched down. As the cargo bay door opened, the shuttles caught up and joined Ain Jalut. "Deploying ground forces now, Skipper." Zara nodded. As soon as everybody had disembarked from the shuttles, they headed back into space to wait for all hell to break loose. Chapter 5. Escape Pod 1. Farka woke with a splitting headache. She managed to find the first aid kit. There was a small mirror in a corner of the escape pod, which allowed her to study her face. A large cut ran across her forehead. Well, that explains the headache. She set to treating the wound, and the pain slowly started to fade. That done, she looked out the pod's only window. Crap, this is not good. The escape pod was heading into an asteroid belt. Worse, she could see that said belt was mined. Looking around the pod, she realized that she was upside down. The pod was a cylinder with a bench facing a control panel. There were cabinets full of supplies above and underneath the bench. Farka sat down on the bench and strapped herself in using a seatbelt. Okay, next crisis. The pod was on autopilot. She left the computer in charge of the course and activated the pod's sensors before activating the emergency beacon. This might attract the wrong kind of attention. But she had no idea of what was inside this nebula and how long it might take the pod to reach someplace safe, so it was a gamble she was willing to make. Finally, she turned off the autopilot. "Goddess, help me." She began weaving the pod through the belt. Shelter Gamma 1. Olaf led the way into the shelter. Located underneath a school, it was a honeycomb of chambers connected by a corridor that sloped down slowly. They had wanted to stay aboard the Ain Jalut, but Dr. Telos had made it crystal clear that they needed to go down to New Rannoch. Not only would they be safer, she had given them an assignment. "We'll write reports on the space battle. Chief Zhukov will be outside the shelters, but we'll need a report from inside as well. And you still have to finish that report Lieutenant Harris asked you to write," she had said. So they had packed their books and supplies, but so far there was not much to write. They reached the end of the corridor. Olaf picked a door and they entered one of the rooms. "It looks like a hotel room," Olaf said, "except there's no windows." The room had 2 beds, table with 4 chairs and a small kitchen. A single door led to a bathroom with a toilet and a shower. "Let's get to work. It'll help pass the time," Aaron said. Olaf nodded and they began unpacking. SSV Ain Jalut. The clock was down to 3 minutes. Everybody was ready for the fight. "Here they come," Rodriguez said, looking at the CIC monitors. "McKinley?" "Ready, Commander. Just give the word, sir." "Not yet, Lieutenant." Zara watched from near the galaxy map. Rodriguez was to her left, while Harris was to the right. They waited until the clock reached 1 minute. "Now, McKinley?" McKinley didn't answer, but the ship bolted as he threw the ship into an evasive maneuver. At the same time, the rest of the fleet also started dodging the Reapers. All the ships opened fire, with the planetary defense cannons also joining in. There had been 3 functional units when they had arrived, but there had been a 4th unit that had been broken. Sanders and her engineers had managed to get it working. The problem had turned out to be the targeting computer. Instead of fixing the computer, they had built a replacement from spare parts. As the Reapers got closer to the planet, the missile silos also opened fire. The missiles couldn't damage the Reapers directly, but detonated around the giant creatures instead. This created electromagnetic pulses that the Quarians hoped would blind the attackers. "It's not working," Harris said. The Reapers continued towards the planet. Soon, they would be in range of the anti-aircraft cannons. "The lasers aren't doing much damage either," Rodriguez said. Zara suppressed a curse. They were throwing everything they had at the enemy, and it simply wasn't enough. Before she could give her next order, the Reapers opened fire on the planet. At last, the moment Avenger had known would come had arrived. They had cornered these lower beings and were now crushing them like the insect they were. The cannons had been their first target. Now they were burning the largest city. And once the pathetic fleet had been destroyed, it would be a matter of waiting for the troop transports so that the harvest could begin. The fleet continued firing on the Reapers. They were descending through the atmosphere as they unleashed one shot after another. But then the AA guns opened fire. Zara had forgotten about these weapons. Not that she was complaining. And whoever was running the guns clearly had a plan. Instead of targeting all 3 Reapers, they were all targeting one of the behemoths. It was like watching an elephant being attacked by 1,000 mosquitoes, but it worked, especially once the fleet concentrated its fire on that particular Reaper. "It's going down, Skipper," Rodriguez said. There was no sound, but Zara could imagine the thud as the Reaper toppled over. The attack then shifted to one of the 2 remaining Reapers. Avenger's moment of glory had vaporized. He had foolishly underestimated these creatures, but he knew this world would fall. Avenger pulled away from the planet, but kept firing. Then he spotted the ship leading the defense, that accursed frigate that had cost them the collector cruiser. He opened fire on it.
Chapter 6. Ain Jalut danced through space as she dodged the lead Reaper's shots. The rest of the fleet and New Rannoch's defenses were busy with other Reaper, so she was on her own. "We need a new plan," Rodriguez said. "Because one hit, McKinley, take us to Planet 5, Zara said into the intercom. "Aye, Captain." The 5th planet was called Netas, which was Quarian for nowhere. It was a gas giant that was mostly hydrogen, but it was useless for helium-3 mining. The colonists had never bothered with it. "It's going to catch us before we get there," Harris said. McKinley jumped the ship into FTL. The Reaper tried to catch them, but the lieutenant anticipated its moves. They reached Netas and dove into the atmosphere. It had been McKinley who had noticed Netas' hydrogen levels during the planning stage. The Reaper stopped shooting, but Zara knew they couldn't hide in here forever. Sooner or later, Reaper reinforcements would arrive, so they needed a plan C. Shelter Gamma 1. The sound of the Reaper shooting had been terrible, but Shelter Gamma 1 had been buried deep. Aaron figured that even the shallowest part of the shelter was 150 meters under the ground. The adults were all gathered in the command room, which was on the other side of the shelter. While they argued about what was going on, the children had gathered in Aaron and Olaf's room. Counting the 2 of them, there were only 8. Aaron had expected more, but the school's children had all been sent home. The 6 children felt were from the Axali's city orphanage. Aaron was about to ask Olaf something when the whole shelter shook. Then the lights went out. Anatoly Zhukov cursed. The fleet had just killed its 2nd Reaper. That was the good news. The bad news was that the Reapers had exploded into chunks, which were now raining down all over the place. One of the biggest chunks had crushed the school above Shelter Gamma 1. The Reapers had also done considerable damage to the city with their laser beams. His troops were defending the Museum of History, or what was left of it. "This is just the start, isn't it?" Avar asked. Batarian, Avar was the most rational of the mercenary forces backing them up. Which was why Zhukov had put him in charge of them. The 2 of them were at the museum entrance, watching for husks. "Yeah," Zhukov began, "the worst is yet to come." The 2 of them settled in for the wait. Down in the shelter, the emergency lights had come on. Ain led the way down the corridor, carrying a flashlight they had found in a supply closet. They turned the corner and her stomach dropped. Behind her, somebody threw up. The corridor had collapsed. And the rooms flanking this section were just as bad. They were cut off from the surface and alone. Zhukov's radio crackled to life. "Team 2 to Team 1, Barnaby said over the line. "I hear you," Zhukov said. "Report, Team 2. "Shelter Gamma 1 was hit bad, sir," Barnaby paused. "Looks like most of it has collapsed, Chief." "Crap," Avar said. "The children were down there." "Return to position Alpha, Team 2. "On our way, Team 1, Team 2 out." Zhukov cursed. Ayers wasn't going to like this when she checked in. SSV Ain Jalut. The Reaper was no longer chasing them, which was bad news. It was ascending out of the atmosphere. Once it cleared it, the Reaper would turn and ignite it with the Ain Jalut inside. "It learned from what we did against the first one," Harris said. "Using our own tactics against us," Rodriguez said. "McKinley," Zara said into the intercom. "Take us deeper." "Captain, you heard me, Lieutenant. Take us down." "Aye, Captain." Ain Jalut dove deeper into the atmosphere. Avenger cleared the atmosphere and turned around. 2 shots, and both the planet and the accursed human frigate would be history. He fired the first shot. The human ship was fleeing deeper into the atmosphere. It wouldn't help them. He fired again, and the planet ignited. But then something unexpected happened. Around them, Ain Jalut creaked as the pressure increased. Zara knew that she was a space vessel, not a submarine, but she also knew that the Reapers hadn't done its homework. Netta's had a small, solid core, surrounded by the massive atmosphere they were now in. When they had built the camouflage system, the Protheans had realized that, when they activated it, the system would also push away Netta's atmosphere. To keep that from happening, they had deployed several shield platforms. And the Quarians had found the codes to that shield, which they had shared with their human allies. As the atmosphere caught fire, Ain Jalut passed the platform, and Zara transmitted the codes. The shield activated, which blocked the fire from reaching them. Avenger roared and fired again, but the Protheans had come up with another plan. They had designed the shield to reflect Reaper laser beams, so Avenger ended up shooting himself. 2 of its tentacles were sheared off. As it roared in pain, the human vessel swung around and opened fire at him. The other ships arrived and joined the attack. Avenger returned fire, but it was too late. Gravity grabbed him and dragged him towards the remains of the gas giant. They had hit something crucial, and the Reapers was now caught in the gravity well of the planet. It spiraled down into the atmosphere. Then it stopped shooting. The pressure was crushing it, and it needed all its energy to survive, but it was not enough. It was dead by the time it reached the surface. Zara got the feeling they had reached the eye of the storm, but it was far from over. Chapter 7 Shelter Gamma 1 Ain felt like throwing up. All the adults were dead, and it was just them. She thought back to a conversation with Rick McKinley. They had been in the mess hall when she had asked how he managed to keep from panicking. "Because there are people counting on me," Rick had said. "Trust me, I'd love to panic. But there are people counting on me, and people will get hurt. I joined the Navy to keep people from getting hurt." She took a deep breath and turned away from the collapsed piece of the shelter. "What do we do now?" Olaf asked. "Remember what Rick said about panicking?" Olaf nodded. He had been there when Rick had answered Aaron's question. "We need to get out of here," Olaf said. "But how?" "Let's see about supplies first," Aaron said. Olaf nodded and led the way back to their room. Omega. Vengeance. The ship had been Ilium-cheesed. So were 3 of the others, and they had lost dozens of people aboard the Omega Vengeance alone. Kaimas and Aram had already decided they needed to evacuate the ships when Ayers asked for a status update. "Do it," Ayers said over the channel. "I recommend you send your people to the Ghost Dreadnoughts. They have the biggest sick bays, and they could use your experience." "Will do. Omega Vengeance out." He closed the channel. They made sure that everybody else was clear. Iram led the group headed for Dreadnought 2, while Kaimas took charge of the Dreadnought 1 survivors. By the time Kaimas reached the Quarian CIC, the wounded were already in sickbay, and his people were already helping the Dreadnought crew. The Dreadnought's captain was called Ramer III. He was in his 50s with eyes that revealed a sharp tactical mind. "Welcome aboard, Captain," Ramer said. "Thank you," Kaimas began. "Now, what can I do?" "I have 2 weapons officers on the verge of panic." He pointed to a set of consoles where 2 junior officers were arguing. "It's their first tour and somebody needs to keep them in check. My people have better things to do. No offense." "None taken. I'll take care of it." Kaimas turned to the officers and began giving orders. SSV Ain Jalut. They had left Netta's and repairs were underway. Zara had left Rodriguez in charge so that she could go check on the true cost. She entered sickbay to find Dr. Tilos giving orders. "How bad is it, doctor?" she asked. "We got lucky, Captain," Tilos began. "We have plenty of wounded, but no dead, ma'am." "Good. What can I do to help?" The Asari handed her a medical kit and pointed to one of the crew members on a nearby bed. "See what you can do about Hendrik's wounds." Zara nodded and got to work. Up in sick, Rodriguez was overseeing repairs. The 4 pirate ships were being placed in orbits, rigged to explode at the push of a button. As soon as they were in place, the 7 survivors would retreat to New Rannoch to lick their wounds. It was Harris who said what he had been thinking. "We're going to have to send a scout." "Yes," Rodriguez said. "Speaking of scouts, do we have an update on when the Quarian units get here?" Harris checked the communication system and his eyebrows went up. "All 12 have reached the rendezvous point outside the nebula." "They should be here in 6.5 hours, Commander." "Good. We can use the firepower." Rodriguez opened a file the Quarians had sent them. The scouts only had a crew of 2, but they had 5 times the firepower of a UT-47 shuttles. Having 12 of them would increase their chances of surviving. Outside of the Epsilon Nebula, the Reaper War raged. But one of the Reapers that was called Ravager noticed a hole in the chaos and fire. Avenger should have reported in by now, shared news of Omega's destruction. Instead, there was only silence. Ravager searched the records for Avenger's last location. It was nowhere near Omega. He sent out orders, and soon he was joined by 11 other Reapers and 6 troop transports. Then they headed out. They would find Avenger and his forces, and Omega would be crushed. As would anything or anybody else they found. Escape pod. 1. The escape pod had finally cleared the mined asteroid belt. Farka leaned back and sighed. The passage had been exhausting. Now the pod was traveling into a solar system that was not on any star chart. "Well, this is new," she said. "Okay, Tyla, time to call for help." She activated the pod's emergency beacon. Of course, there was the risk of Reapers showing up, but she couldn't stay out here forever. "Please don't be a Reaper," Farka said, while biting her lower lip. A beep indicated that something was approaching. Now all she could do was wait and hope that when it arrived, it wouldn't vaporize her. Chapter 8. SSV Orizaba. Admiral Stephen Hackett was in his office reading reports when somebody rang the bell. He gave the order to enter and Private Hank Lewis came in. "Sir, we have a possible update on the Ain Jalut," he said as he offered Hackett an electronic pad. "A possible update?" Hackett said as he took the pad. "We either have an update or we don't." "Well, sir, the Asari spotted a group of Reapers headed for Omega, but they never got there, Admiral." "The thing is, Admiral, the ship doing the spotting are the same 2 ships responding to the Ain Jalut's distress call, sir." "We only got their report now because it was transmitted on a lower priority channel, sir." Lewis paused. "I attached a map, sir." Hackett opened the attachment and realized what Lewis was seeing. The map showed the Reapers would have taken to Omega. It passed right past the location where the AML Valkyrie had called for help on the Ain Jalut's behalf. "You think the Reapers heading for Omega diverted to go after the Ain Jalut?" "Yes, sir," Lewis said. "And we just got a report from the Turians." They spotted 12 Reapers and 6 troop transports headed straight for the Epsilon Nebula, sir. Hackett closed the attachment and opened the Turian report. You think the Ain Jalut is putting up enough of a fight to make the Reapers call for reinforcements? Hackett asked. Or something else? There is one piece of the puzzle, sir. It's a Turian report on the 7 ghosts, sir. Lewis paused, allowing Hackett to open the last file on the pad. 12 ghosts scouts have rendezvoused near the Epsilon Nebula. Sir, everybody avoids the nebula like the plague. And then it clicked in his head. If the ghost's homeworld was inside the nebula, it would explain why nobody had ever found it. It also explained why the Reapers were taking troop transports to an area where everybody said there was nobody to invade. It also gave the Ain Jalut a fighting chance to survive if the planet had a defense grid. Write up your theory and transmit it to the Elalamine and Verdun before they reached the nebula. Dismissed. He handed the pad back to Lewis, who saluted and left his office. SSV Ain Jalut. Tyla Farka was glad to be out of the escape pod. She was in the airlock of the Ain Jalut. The decontamination sweep passed over her and the door opened. 2 Alliance officers led her to the ship's sickbay. The place was controlled chaos. Surprisingly, an Asari was running things. The doctor sat her down on one of the beds and began examining her. Vara Tilos, doctor, the doctor said. And you are? Tyla Farka, reporter, Thesha News Service. Welcome aboard the SSV Ain Jalut. The doctor continued her examination. She had just finished when a woman entered the room. Her uniform made it clear that she was the ship's captain. Captain Zara Ayers, Systems Alliance. Tyla Farka, reporter, Thesha News Service. What's her condition, doctor? Nothing a good meal, a shower, and good night's sleep won't cure, ma'am. Good, Ayers began. Now, what brings a reporter out here? Farka took a deep breath and began explaining how she had ended up here. Shelter Gamma. 1. They had gathered anything that might be useful and that they could carry. It had taken a bit of searching, but they had found an air duct, and now they were crawling through said duct, looking for a way out. Come out to New Rannoch, we'll have a few laughs, Olaf said as they crawled. Die hard. Aaron said, Really? It seemed fitting. They reached a corner and crawled past it. 2 meters later, the duct ended at a grid. Beyond was a sewer lit by gas lamp. Olaf opened the roster and led the way into the sewer. This place stinks. Hera, once of the Quarian children, said. But it's not damaged, Aaron said. How far from the surface are we? Pretty far. Our history teacher said they're under the Prothean ruins. I wonder if they also connect to other shelters, Olaf said. If they do, we'd be safe in one of them, Hera said. Sounds like a plan to me, Aaron said. Aaron and Olaf took the lead as they headed deeper into the sewer. The 6 Quarian children followed. Besides Hera, there was 1 and 4 boys. They were called Lexa, Jan, Bart, Carol, and Tom. Lexa and Jan came last. It was Jan that suddenly called for them to stop. He was pointing his flashlight at something off to the side. There's a ladder here, he said. It seems to go down. The rest of the group backtracked. They studied the ladder. As Jan had said, it went down, but there was no passage up. It ended on this level. Olaf and Aaron exchanged looks. Then they led the way down. Chapter 9. SSV Elalamine. Captain Marcus O'Neill was in CIC when the message came through. It was an intelligence report written by a Private Lewis, who was posted aboard the SSV Orizaba. At first, he was surprised by the report. But then he realized that it had been sent on a channel that required Hackett's authorization to use. And Hackett didn't tolerate fools. Anything useful, sir? A female voice said. Staff Lieutenant Andrea Haley was the acting XO due to the simple fact that she was the ranking member of the few other officer aboard. She was only a few months out of training, but she was hardworking, caring, and smart. Read the report yourself. And yes, I know you don't have the clearance level, so I'm making it an order, Lieutenant. O'Neill paused. Where's Red? In sickbay, he's helping our civilian doctor and settle in. When they had left dry dock, they had left without a medical officer. They had passed near the Terra Nova colony, where they had drafted Dr. Oscar Mulrooney. Red was Operations Chief Redmond Ayers, Zara Ayers' brother. Mark had originally asked for an operations chief called Paul Henderson. Not only was Henderson good at his job, hiring him would avoid the appearance of nepotism. But Admiral Singh had other plans. After discussing it with Hackett, he'd assigned Henderson to Verdun and put Redmond aboard El Alamein. Good. I want him to read it after he's done down there. Yes, sir. Haley said, I'll take care of it. He left her to it. She didn't need him breathing down her neck. SSV Verdun. Lieutenant Commander Daniel Vale was not supposed to be in command of the Verdun. That job was officially meant for Captain Henry DeWitt. But DeWitt had ended up in charge of the SSV Zama after her CO had been killed during a Reaper attack. So here he was, running a skeleton crew of nervous crew members. He couldn't blame them. This war was pure insanity, unlike anything they were trained for. It helped that Paul Henderson was aboard. Henderson was an excellent operations chief. His presence helped the enlisted crew keep their calm. Commander, a male voice began, we have a message on Channel Delta 2. The voice belonged to Staff Lieutenant Eric Kepler, Verdun's acting XO. Kepler was a capable officer, which was why Vale had given him a field promotion to his current rank and post of XO. They were in CIC together. Delta 2 requires Hackett's approval to use. Put it up. Kepler opened the message. Vale whistled when he reached the bit about the possibility of them being headed towards a lost Quarian colony. Thoughts, Lieutenant? Vale asked. Hackett wouldn't have sent the unless he thought there was something to it. He's too good an admiral to waste time during a war, sir, especially during one with the whole galaxy on the line. And I know that there's more from that look on your face, Lieutenant. Permission to speak freely, sir. Granted. We're running Verdun with a skeleton crew. If we go into battle now, we'll get out butts kicked. If there's a colony in there, we might be able to get the people we need there, sir. Vale nodded and thought that Kepler's assessment was right on the money. Alas, there was only way to find out. SSV Ain Jalut. Rodriguez sighed as he listened to Zara's update. The briefing room was undergoing repairs, so he, Harris, and Ayers were gathered in the captain's quarters instead. Great, so now we have to babysit an Asari reporter? Dr. Telos is taking care of that. She can use the extra pair of hands. Now that we've dealt with that, Harris began, what's our plan for the next wave? The wave that could arrive at any moment, that wave? Zara asked. They started discussing their options. Over in sickbay, the list of patients was as short as it was going to get. Only 2 of the beds were still taken. Great, Farka said. So now I'm stranded in this sickbay while all the action happens out there. Be glad you are, Telos began. This isn't just some story, Tyla. This is a war. With the entire galaxy in the balance, trillions of lives are at stake. This planet, these battles are just the tiniest shard of the madness. Farka nodded. She realized that Telos was probably right, having heard Commander Shepard's claims back in the day. And from what she had seen so far, she was leaning towards agreeing with this being a fight for survival. So, what can I do? We need to help keep morale up. For now, that's the best we can do. Farka nodded again, and she had an idea. Then she walked out of sickbay. She had work to do. Commander Claudia Sanders wished they could communicate with the galaxy outside the Epsilon Nebula. Then they would at least have a time estimate for when the next group of Reapers arrived. But the simple truth was that they couldn't, so they had no idea how long they had. Other engineers would have pushed their people to rush. But one of Claudia's mentors, Greg Adams, had taught her that was stupid. Do it right or else it's going to break later and get people killed, he had said. So she was taking the approach of slow and steady wins the race. At the moment, she was diagnostics and engineering, making sure they hadn't missed anything. She wished Private Barnaby was here, but Barnaby was down on the surface with Zhukov. A pang of worry rippled through her chest. She cursed, then turned her attention back to the screen. New Rannoch. Sewers. It had taken time, but they had found an air duct that was labeled Shelter Alpha 8. Olaf had managed to open the grid. Now they were climbing in, using their flashlights to see where they were going. It took several tries, but they found an exit into the shelter. The room they entered was dark and dusty. Aaron led the way into the corridor. It was the same as the room, so Shelter Alpha 8 was not very promising. Ravager and his fellow Reapers had reached the edge of what the species of the galaxy called the Epsilon Nebula. The last signal from Avenger and his group had come from here. They had been chasing a human vessel called Ain Jalut. Ravager intended to find it and crush it. Chapter 10. The first sign that the second half of the storm had arrived was an emergency ping from one of the buoys that the Quarians used to tap galactic comm traffic. It detected the Reapers and was able to send its warning before it was destroyed. In sick, Rick McKinley started giving orders. Taylor had taken over the helm and he was the ranking officer, so that Ayers, Harris, and Rodriguez could get some sleep. Down in the mess hall, Farka had been cooking to boost morale. She figured that a good meal helped any nerves trying to invade one's stomach. McKinley's voice was calm, which helped her own nerves. She turned off the hot plate and cleaned up. It was at this point that Captain Ayers left her quarters. "Miss Farka, come with me, please." "Me, in sick." She followed the captain to CIC. "Isn't this against regulations?" "Probably." "But Serviceman Jones is going to have her hands full with communications, unless I can find somebody to help her." "Somebody who is a level 5 radio operator." "Ah, you checked my profile in the database." She nodded. "I'll take care of it." Amanda Mandy Jones was short, with blue eyes and short blonde hair. Her hands were shaking as they operated her console. "First tour of duty?" Farka asked. "Yes, ma'am. I've been aboard for 5 weeks, ma'am." "Tyla, please call me Tyla." "Mandy." They shook hands. "So any advice?" "Take a deep breath, count to 4, and at one message at a time." Mandy nodded, and they got to work. Zara watched as Farka helped Jones. Like the reporter had said, she had checked Farka's profile in the database. Farka was an undercover reporter. She had also reported on several small conflicts in the Terminus systems. As for Mandy Jones, she was brilliant academically. But she had grown up on Bekenstein, the 4th daughter of a rich industrialist. So she had been sheltered and spoiled. Her enlistment in the Navy had been an act of rebellion against her parents, but was quickly turned in a steep learning curve about how the galaxy really worked. Her ponderings were ended by Harris and Rodriguez entering the CIC. They quickly took their posts. "How bad is it, Skipper?" Rodriguez asked. 18 contacts, 12 Reapers and 6 troop transports. The troop transports had entered the atmosphere on the far side of the planet, while the Reapers were headed straight for the fleet. "We need to put more distance between us and the planet," Zara said as she activated the intercom. "Helm, get us some distance from the surface." "Aye, Captain," Taylor said. Ain Jalut swung away from the planet as New Rannoch's defense grid opened fire on the troop transports. The second half of the battle had begun in earnest. Zhukov heard the transports before he saw them. There was the rumbling sound of their engines and the sound of the AA guns trying to shoot them down. 2 of the transports didn't make it. They were shredded by the guns. A third made the mistake of landing in the wrong place. As soon as its main hatch opened, the twisted beings inside were mowed down. A smart AA gunner had waited for the craft to touch down, using the time to lower the weapons barrel down as far as it would go. And when the moment came, his crew had used their gun as an anti-personnel weapon. Nearby police officers guarding one of the local shelters had followed up with small arms fire and a rain of grenades. When the dust had settled, not a single husk had been left alive. But that was where the good news ended. Tango 1, 2, and 3 have touched down. Barnaby said over the radio. "You've got a LOT of Reaper husks headed towards your position, Chief." "Roger that." As if on cue, hundreds of zombified humans, Asari and Tyrians, poured onto the square. They made guttural noises, but they were clearly being coordinated by somebody or something. "Wait for it," Avar said. The husks charged and the guns cut loose. Shelter Alpha 8. The good news was that they had finally found people. The bad news was that those people were cranky guards with guns. "Halt!" one of the guards roared. "How did you get in here?" They were standing in a luxurious corridor with heavy-duty doors. The Quarian children were paralyzed with fear, so Aaron spoke up. "Through an air duct on level 3. "Level 3? The lead guard frowned. "That level was sealed years ago." "Well, not completely." Before the lead guard could reply, one of the doors opened and Admiral Harash stepped into the corridor. "Sergeant, what is going around here?" "Admiral, we caught a group of intruders." "Did you?" Harash's tone of voice made it clear that he was not believing the guard's story. "Well, they do look extremely dangerous. So tell me, how did you make it in here?" Aaron explained about how Shelter Gamma 1 had collapsed after the Reaper attack. Then she told Harash about how they had trekked from Gamma 1 to Alpha 8 through the sewers. And that level 3 was a massive security leak. When she was done, Harash nodded. "Weren't you and Olaf supposed to go home aboard the Ain Jalut?" "Yes, but then the Reapers showed up." Harash turned to the lead guard. "Sergeant, take them to room 17. "But, sir, regulations state that." Harash gave him a look that made him swallow the rest of that sentence. "Yes, Admiral." Aaron led the way as they followed the sergeant. Something in her stomach told her that their problem had only just begun. The square had turned into hell. Dead husks littered the place. Explosives had blown craters into the ground. They had lost the people to the assault. The museum had taken damage as well. Barnaby's team had abandoned their position to keep them from being overrun. They were putting down covering fire from a nearby building. 2 police teams had joined their position. Their shelters were being defended by 2 volunteer militias now. "Don't waste any ammo," Zhukov shouted into his radio. "Make your shots count?" "Yes, Chief," came the replies over the radio. He shot a human husk before putting 3 rounds into an Asari that had been mutated into something horrible. It was not impressed, but it was distracted. So the thing didn't notice the mine it had stepped on until it was too late. The explosive took both its legs off and Zhukov killed it with a headshot. He was taking down a Turian husk when there was an animalistic roar. The source, however, was an elderly Quarian. Armed with a sword, the man charged the husk army. "Get!" A human husk went down. "Off!" An Asari lost her head. "My grass." Zhukov and Avar exchanged looks. Then they went back to shooting husks. SSV Ain Jalut. The battle was not going well. 3 ships had been wiped out in the opening salvo, and then the 4 survivors had been forced to scatter. Ain Jalut had lost track of the rest of the fleet as she dodged Reaper fire. Zara cursed. The Reaper had entered the nebula from a different direction as Avengers group, rendering their trap at Netta's useless. Between that and the Reaper's numbers, it would take a miracle for anybody to survive this fight. She was about to give an order when Farka spoke up. "Captain, we're getting a signal from inside the nebula." "It's weird, ma'am." "Let's hear it." Farka pressed a button and AC/DC's Thunderstruck boomed through the CIC. Zara and Rodriguez exchanged looks. "No way," Zara said. "It can't be." Who else would be crazy enough to make an entrance like this? And then the person the both thought it was made her presence known. Chapter 11. Jill Amazon Da was a legend in the Systems Alliance. Born in 2136, she had served with David Anderson during the First Contact War and aboard the SSV Hastings afterwards. She had climbed the ranks from gunnery chief to lieutenant commander after Stephen Hackett had insisted that she should accept an officer's commission. At 6 feet and 3 inches or 190 centimeters, she was distinct. She had been retired, having left the Navy 2 weeks ago. And then the Reapers had invaded. "Just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in," she grunted. Her freighter, MSV Bellerophon, was currently loaded to the brim with Krogan mercenaries. She'd been collecting them from all over the Terminus systems. Rumor had it there was some kind of political turmoil brewing on the Krogan homeworld of Tuchanka, and a lot of Krogan wanted to go home to get some answers. But then, the Reapers had invaded. When the AML Valkyrie's message had reached them, the ranking Krogan, a battle master called Varrock Crag, had agreed that they needed to go. So here she was with a crew of 22, counting her, and a cargo bay with 311 Krogan. "Looks like we found the fight," her XO said. Harry Tyler had been the captain of the MSV Endeavour for 27 years. The Reapers had cut his ship in half, but he had gotten his people out alive. "Ready for some payback, Harry?" "You bet I am, Amy." Dawn nodded, and Harry began flipping switches. He began by transmitting Thunderstruck on all channels, then he cut loose the tethers. When they had entered the system, they had found 4 jury-rigged in orbit of the 50 planet, and they were dragging all 4 of those wrecks along. It hadn't been easy to get them up to speed, but they had pulled it off. The 4 wrecks kept going while the Bellerophon peeled away. SSV Ain Jalut. Zara pressed the transmit button and waited for the blasts. All 4 wrecks exploded, warping space and sending bolts of energy in all directions. Space snapped back into place, sending more bolts of energy coursing through the area. Ain Jalut managed to clear the blast. 2 Reapers were not so lucky. One was killed outright, while the other was caught in the gravity well of New Rannoch. It crashed on the northern continent. A 3rd Reaper turned away from the Ain Jalut to chase the Bellerophon. "I'm not complaining," Rodriguez said. But how did one freighter just pull 4 wrecks along? "That's an Athabasca-class freighter fitted with a Tyrian Mark III engine combo," Harris said. "And based on our sensor logs, they made some repairs to the wrecks before getting them moving." Rodriguez nodded. The first wave of Reapers had triggered enough of the mines in the inner asteroid belt to leave a safe passage that the Bellerophon could fly through without triggering alarms. And all the Bellerophon had needed to do was get the ships moving. After that, physics had done the rest. The freighter and the tethers had simply kept the wrecks on course. Over at the communications station, Farka turned to Jones. "Did I miss something, Mandy? When I was in the academy, there was this legendary Marine instructor called Jill Daw. She always played that song at the start of final survival training before graduation. It was the make-or-break moment for her course." "She retired 2 weeks ago, Tyla," Jones nodded. "I heard she bought a freighter, I just didn't know which one." Then one of the Reapers fired at the ship, and Taylor threw them into wild turn to dodge it, ending the conversation. Ravager cursed as he chased the Ain Jalut. This blasted ship had cost them too much already. It needed to be destroyed right now. He had no intention of becoming its next victim, so he fired again and again. But the blasted ship kept dodging his shots. He ordered 2 more of its kin to attack it. This would be the end of the Ain Jalut. They were surrounded. Taylor was doing his best, but it was only a matter of time before they hit and it was over. Zara's mind was racing, looking for a way out. "Come on, Z-Think," she said, "or else this is going to end badly." On the screen, the Reapers were closing in. Then the Ain Jalut dove into the atmosphere of New Rannoch. 3 of the Reapers followed, but the AA guns cut loose. It bought them the time they needed. She ordered Taylor to skim lower over the northern continent. The ship swung to the new course. When they got there, the heat from the engines caused the ice touched by the wake to turn into steam. It was enough to make the Reapers miss twice. But then they reached the other side of the continent, so Taylor swung the ship around. He hoped that Captain Ayers would be able to pull a miracle out of her hat, or they would end up melting the whole continent's ice shelf. Shelter Alpha 8. Room 17 turned out to be a bedroom. There were several bunks, along with a table with 10 chairs. One corner had a kitchen and there was a door to a bathroom. "So now what?" Jan asked. "I don't know," Aaron said. "There's not much we can do." They were children and this was war. Aaron knew that people were dying. She wanted to panic, wanted to throw up, wanted to cry. Part of her brain was worried about Chief Zhukov, while another part wanted to talk to Rick again. As the storm raged inside her brain, she sat down on one of the chairs. Next to her, Olaf unpacked their stuff. "We should have stayed on the ship," Aaron said with a sigh. "There was nothing we could have done there," Olaf began. "We just would have been in the way." "What is it like?" Hera asked. "Being on a spaceship?" "You've never been on a spaceship?" Aaron asked. "No," Jan said. "Only adults get to go into space." Glad for the distraction, Aaron began telling them about their past adventures. Museum of History. They were running low on ammo. The police units had brought them extra thermal clips, but it was not enough. As for the greenskeeper, he had managed to take down more than 40 husks before being overwhelmed. They had managed to get him out of there, and he was being treated for his wounds. But his odds were not good. To make things worse, the Reapers were unleashing extra large husks that Zhukov was calling brutes in his head. He shot another husk and cursed. Another wave of husks came charging forward and was riddled with heavy caliber bullets. Who said the cavalry is always late? Avar said with a smile. Looking up, he saw a ghost scout ship swooping in. A second one appeared and unleashed another salvo. He had been so focused on the local battle that he didn't see the rest of the fight. There were Reapers in the distance, having landed on the surface. The remaining 10 scouts were bobbing and weave, firing missiles and machine guns at them. Then the 2 scouts dropped 1 box of ammo each. Avar made hand signals, and the rest of the soldiers provided cover fire as they collected the boxes. They opened them and started handing out the clips. For now, they were ready for another round in hell. Chapter 12. SSV Bellerophon. Da threw the Bellerophon through several wild turns, barely dodging Reaper's weapons fire. But they were drawing the monstrous thing towards where they needed it to go. The shell that camouflaged this system was unlike anything Da had ever seen before. When they had entered this system, it had been crystal clear that they had passed through some kind of artificial barrier. It had been Tyler that had asked the obvious question, how come the barrier doesn't rush back in? The answer was a zone of distorted gravity. Only 2 meters thick, it as a bubble around the system. Solid objects like spaceships and Reapers could push through it like it was tissue paper, but the gas couldn't cross, thus maintaining the status quo. Creating the gravity bubble was the job of a network of satellites. These were unarmed when built, but they had been refitted with anti-asteroid lasers since construction. "Come and get us, you blasted metal octopus," Da said. "Crag," Tyler said into the intercom. "How many EM grenades do you have down there? Enough to fry a small city, but they won't even scratch that thing's paint. Don't worry, we're the ones doing the painting here. Put them all in a crate and get them down to the main airlock." "Will do, Crag out." Several more wild turns later, a button on Tyler's console lit up. Crag had opened the inner doors to the crate inside the airlock. As if on cue, a Reaper shot barely missed the ship. "Running out of time here," Da said. Tyler slammed a button and the airlock cycled. A crate full of electromagnetic grenades sailed through space with all the speed it could muster. The Reaper didn't even register the crate until it exploded. But the grid that kept the gas from rushing back and most certainly did. And then it broke a major rule. Throughout the galaxy, everybody knew that lasers couldn't travel faster than the speed of light. That was a rule of physics that was carved into the universe itself. The Quarians, however, had found a way to bend the rule. The satellites projected a hollow tube of distorted gravity. The laser was then fired down this tube, and for every second that passed inside the tube, 12 passed outside it. As for why the Ain Jalut had not seen the network, the answer was simple. They had flown in and out through what was basically the solar system's front door. While ships could easily punch through the gravity bubble, that gave away the existence of the satellite network, which the locals wanted to keep under wraps. So they had created a hole in the network to hide the secret. But the Bellerophon had gone off the beaten path, forcing her to push through the gravity shell. She'd also gotten a close look at the satellites and figured out a thing or two about them. Like the fact that they were programmed to defend the solar system from natural hazards, like asteroid and comets, not warships and Reapers, unless you gave it them a very clear signal. And a crate of EM grenades exploding fit that bill. The grid cut loose. The Reaper chasing the Bellerophon called itself Ban Maho. It meant dark spirit in the language of a long-extinct species that nobody remembered. Ban Maho watched as dozens of targets appeared out of nowhere. Based on the fact that they weren't moving, it realized that they were some kind satellites. And then the laser bolts hit. The Reaper screamed as two of its tentacles were sliced off. It targeted the nearest satellite and prepared to fire. And then several nukes hit it. SSV Ain Jalut. The Reaper was still chasing them. Taylor was doing the best flying of his life, dodging laser bolts like it was nobody's business. Rick McKinley had made his way to the bridge, but with the enemy on their back, there was no way for him to take the helm, so he had gone to Plan B, which was get behind the sensor station. Crap, Taylor snapped. I'm running out of space here. They needed a genius move, and they needed it now, or this was going to end badly. And then Rick had an idea. It was a crazy idea, but it was still or nothing. You up for something crazy? McKinley said, Always, boss. Taylor said as he took Ain Jalut through another turn. What do you have in mind? McKinley grinned before he started explaining his insane plan. Ravager hated the Ain Jalut with a passion. This blasted, cursed ship kept dodging his shots. Then it suddenly turned around and bolted right for him. Ravager and his fellow Reaper Zarak were forced to split formation. Ravager turned to regain his weapon's lock. But the human vessel was not where he expected it to be. Then he spotted it and realized it was spiraling away from the plane of the solar system. He turned and resumed the pursuit. In sick, Zara blinked. Taylor had pulled a crazy Ivan and now was taking them towards the shell, but they were taking the short route. The bubble surrounding the new Rannoch system was not a sphere. Instead, it was an oval. While there was no such thing as up and down in space, you could go in those directions if you pretended the solar plane was a solid disk. And right now, Ain Jalut was basically diving under the plane. Alas, so were the Reapers. We're hitting them with everything we've got, but it's barely making a dent, Harris said. I'm open to suggestions. Zara said. Rodriguez looked at the sensor displays and had an idea. It was crazy and desperate, but it was better than nothing. Museum of History. 2 husks fell from cover fire by Barnaby's team, while Zhukov's team shot another 3. Hell was continuing to burn, and they were still throwing zombies into it. That was the good news. The bad news was that they were losing ground. Holding the entrance had become impossible, so they had retreated to the Grand Hall. Still with us, Avar, Zhukov said as he killed an Asari monster. Alive and shooting these ugly bastards, Avar said before putting 2 rounds in a Turian male, but they keep coming. Tell me something I don't know. Even if you weren't allergic to it, you should never eat Borgat. It takes like rubber. Zhukov laughed as he shot another husk. Across the square, Maria Barnaby lay on her belly and peered down her assault rifle's scope. Barnaby wasn't alone. She was accompanied by her team and several Quarian defenders they had picked up along the way. They were on the roof of one of the buildings surrounding the square. Using the fact that they had the high ground to their advantage, they were picking off as many husks as they could. Oddly enough, the husks were not trying to scale the building they were on. Instead, they seemed obsessed with taking the museum. And then it clicked in her head. One of the entrances to the Prothean ruins was in the museum. That was what they were really after. The question was, why? What were they afraid of? She didn't have any answers, but the Reapers had no way of knowing that, so her plan was to keep shooting husks. The longer they could keep the enemy from reaching those ruins, the better. Shelter Alpha 8. Aaron and Olaf had told the Quarian children all about their adventures in space. It had helped with the noises leaking in from the outside. Despite them being deep underground, they could hear explosions, gunfire, and Reaper laser beams. They're going to kill everybody, aren't they? Hera asked. That's their plan, isn't it? For every planet that has an advanced civilization, Aaron said, in the entire galaxy, Olaf added with a nod. Saying it out loud made Olaf's stomach twists, but not saying it wouldn't make it go away. I wish there was something we could do, Jan said. Instead of just hiding here. We're children. What can we do against killer octopuses from space? Olaf wished he had a different answer than nothing. A heavy silence fell over the room. In the command center, Admiral Harash and Vice Admiral Rackle were looking at tactical maps. The ground forces defending the underground shelters were making the Reapers bleed for every inch of the planet. But the AA grid was almost completely wiped out, and the fleet wasn't doing well either. Their numbers had been reduced, and the remaining ships were under attack. Despite everybody fighting as hard as they could, it would take a miracle to save New Rannoch. And from what they were seeing on the maps and displays, their luck had finally run out. Chapter 13. MSV Bellerophon. The Reaper that had been chasing them was getting hammered by the satellite grid, but it was still not enough, and then Da and Tyler spotted 3 signals approaching. "Please tell me those aren't more Reapers," Tyler said. "The sensor resolution is horrible," Da began. "I can't tell a brick from a passenger line on this cursed thing." She was behind the helm while Tyler was manning the sensors. Her fingers flew across the controls. "But I know we have 30 seconds before they get here." Tyler cursed. The last thing they needed now was uncertainty. And they still had a load of Krogan to deliver to the surface. Of course, if they got blasted to pieces, that was not happening. Da swung the Bellerophon to a new course to put distance between them and the approaching signals. But then time ran out. The 3 signals, whatever they were, cleared the shell. Ban Maho had blasted several of the satellites, but they kept shooting. The primitive nuclear bombs had blinded it for a moment, allowing the freighter he had been chasing to escape. But once he blasted enough of those satellites, it was only a matter of time before he tracked it down and destroyed it, and then he spotted them. 2 Asari cruisers and a Turian cruiser. They opened fire on him right away. SSV Ain Jalut. Ain Jalut dove into the shell. Flying through the shell at FTL speeds required careful navigation, and in the case of the Ain Jalut, there was another complication. Normandy-class ships had state-of-the-art stealth systems. But when the ship went to FTL inside the nebula, those systems were worthless. Rodriguez knew all this, but he also knew that they weren't going to lose the Reapers by playing it safe. He activated the intercom and gave Taylor an order. The ship swung to a new course and jumped into FTL with the Reaper following. "Come on, you stupid octopuses, follow," Rodriguez said. Zara just hoped that the crazy move they were about to pull wouldn't kill them. They went in and out of the shell, like a dolphin jumping out of the water and then diving back on the surface. This didn't stop the Reapers from chasing her, but the fluctuations were keeping the Reapers from paying attention to where the Ain Jalut was running to. After the gas giant of Netta's had turned out to be a bust as a source of helium-3, they had needed a new plan. And Lieutenant McKinley's guess had been right on the money. When they had arrived for the first time, he had guessed that the locals got their helium-3 by converting regular helium from the shell. To do that, they had built Conversion Platform Alpha. And the section of the shell underneath wasn't helium, it was helium-3. For safety reason, this area was normally fenced off by force field barriers. But the crew of Alpha saw Ain Jalut coming and realized what she was up to. They opened a section of the force field, which Zara could see on the scanners. "Come on, you bastards, follow us in," she said. For now, they were outrunning the Reapers. Alas, there was only one way to find out if they would make it. MSV Bellerophon. "Yes," Tyler yelled, leaning back in his chair. Da and Tyler watched as the new arrivals tipped the balance in the defenders' favor. He turned to Da and grinned. She grinned back. "Let's go deliver our cargo bay full of Krogan," Da said. "Sounds like a plan, Skipper." They swung the Bellerophon to a course for New Rannoch. Behind them, the Reaper was now taking a pounding. As they entered the atmosphere, the metal octopus finally died. Da and Tyler worked the controls frantically to keep them out of the crosshairs of the Reapers on the surface. "So where do we drop them, Skipper?" Tyler asked. "If I were the bad guys, I'd focus on the capital city, so that's where we're going." Tyler just hoped they would be able to make a dent. Barnaby was running low on ammo, despite her best efforts to conserve it. Her position on the roof of the government build meant that she was the first to see the Bellerophon approach. "What the hell?" she said. "Where did that come from?" The freighter opened a hatch and Krogan started dropping out by the dozens. They immediately began slaughtering husks left and right. Within minutes, the square was cleared out. Barnaby activated her radio. "Chief, you seeing this?" "Yes, I am," Zhukov said, "and I'm not complaining." Neither did Barnaby, but she was well aware that was only a lull in the fight. SSV Ain Jalut. Taylor spotted the hole in the force field and threaded the ship through it. The Reapers realized that they were surrounded by helium-3, so they stopped shooting. Because they knew that if they fired, it would destroy the Ain Jalut, but the helium-3 would take them out as well. Which was why they had stopped blasting, but they didn't stop coming. Ravager kept chasing the Ain Jalut. He was going to end this ship, and then he was going to end the Quarian colonists. Soon, it would pass out the other side of the helium-3 patch, and he would resume firing. Ravager knew the helium-3 was a potential trap. But he had calculated that the human vessel couldn't detonate the pocket without getting caught in the blast herself. The humans wouldn't take that chance. He was still certain of his math when the explosion happened. Zara had to grab one of the consoles to stay on her feet. Alpha had fired a nuclear fission warhead into the helium-3 after Ain Jalut had sent them an order to do so. The Reapers had been right to consider detonating the helium-3 pocket crazy. A regular nuclear bomb wouldn't do the job, but adding a small amount of element 0 had fixed that. Rodriguez had known about the element 0 upgrade because it had been mentioned in the information packet they had gotten from the ghosts before the battle had begun. This left them facing a shockwave that would crush anything it touched. Ain Jalut was fighting not to be on that list. "The shockwave is approaching," Harris said before cursing in Tyrian. "Impact in 10 seconds. Captain," Tyla Farka began, "I'm reading 2 automated beacons." "It'll have to wait. We have an explosion to survive first," Zara said. Ain Jalut, however, had one advantage over the Reapers. They knew where Alpha was beforehand, so had already been headed for the station when the missile entered the pocket of helium-3. She reached the station, which had a single dock. Taylor slipped the Ain Jalut inside and a force field snapped into place 2 seconds before the shockwave rattled all of Alpha. Electrical energy crackled through the frame surrounded the Ain Jalut now, but the ship was fine. Now the question was, how were the Reapers doing? Zara hoped they'd been vaporized. Ravager screamed as he was hit by heat, radiation, and electromagnetic energy. Zarak had been closer than him and was killed by the blast. He had been so focused on destroying the human ship that he had forgotten about the Myanmar, the third Reaper chasing it. Not that it mattered now, because Myanmar was also undone by the blast. As the blast faded, Ravager looked around for his prey. He spotted it, and he spotted it again. Then he realized what was actually happening. Ravager cursed as the 2 human vessels opened fire. Museum of History. Cragg stepped into what was left of the Museum of History. The Krogan force had split into 2 groups. Group Alpha was preparing to defend the square against the next wave, while Group Beta was going on the offensive. They had also delivered ammo to Barnaby's team and set up sniper nests at key locations. "Cragg," a Batarian voice said, "is that you old war dog? Avar, how did you end up here? It's a long story, so it'll have to wait." "I hate to interrupt," Zhukov said, "but we have a mystery to solve." "What mystery?" Cragg asked. Avar explained how the capital city sat on Prothean ruins, and how the museum had one of only 3 entrances. "So, what's so special about these Prothean ruins?" Cragg asked. "What makes them different from all the other Prothean ruins in the galaxy?" "That's the mystery," Zhukov said. "You up for a hunt? Let's go." Zhukov took point, with Avar in the middle and Cragg taking up the rear. Shelter Alpha 8. Harash watched as things changed on the sensor screens. The 3 new arrivals had eliminated one of the Reapers further away from the planet. 2 of them were Asari, and 1 was Tyrian. They moved on to come to the aid of Dreadnought 1, which was still exchanging blows with a Reaper in orbit. At the same time, the freighter had dropped a load of Krogan warriors. It gave him sparks of hope, but the Reapers down on the surface were still wrecking his world and killing his people. Still, Maybe that miracle was going to happen. The silence in the room was broken by an alarm. Erin stuck her head out of the door and looked both ways. People were running back and forth all over the place. It was Jan who decided that he was done sitting still. He bolted from the room. He's going to get into trouble. Olaf said. Yep. Erin said with a sigh. Let's go after him. They went after Jan. He was in a chaotic control room, hiding in a small nook behind a large computer server. Erin and Olaf managed to squeeze into the nook as well. Jan signaled for silence so that they could overhear the officials talking. The Prothean ruins have been breached, sir, one of the officers said. By who? His superior officer asked. A human, a Batarian, and a Krogan. Based on the readings, they are not husks. He paused. Orders, sir. The senior officer activated his communications device. At the same time, Jan, Erin, and Olaf sneaked out of the control room. Apparently, they weren't the only ones sneaking around. They made it halfway back to their room before everything went horribly wrong. SSV Ain Jalut. McKinley had taken the helm, while Taylor was now behind the scanner console. The frame around the dock had acted like a Faraday cage, protected the ship from the helium-3 explosion. As McKinley backed the ship away from conversion platform Alpha, he made a mental note to recommend Taylor for promotion as soon as he could. While he put distance between them and Alpha, Tyla Farka and Mandy Jones were working the communications console in the CIC. Captain, Farka began. I've identified those 2 beacons. They're friend or foe markers, Skipper. Good work, Tyla, Zara said. What's the database readout? It's coming through now, Skipper, Jones said. Beacon 1 is the SSV Ain Jalut SR-2, Captain Marcus O'Neill in command. Good, we can use the help. Captain O'Neill used to be Commander O'Neill, Jones said. He was assigned as XO here. I see. The console beeped again. Beacon 2 is the SSV Verdun SR-4, Lieutenant Commander Daniel Vale in command. I thought Henry DeWitt was supposed to command that ship, Harris said. It does say that he's acting commander, Jones said. DeWitt must have been killed or reassigned. We'll figure that out later, Zara said. Zara turned her attention back to the displays. Their crazy plan had worked out. 2 of the 3 Reapers that had been chasing them had been taken out, and the 3rd was taking a beating from Elalamine and Verdun. Ain Jalut entered weapons range and joined the attack. Between the 3 of them, the ships took the Reaper down. Then they formed a formation and headed for New Rannoch. Chapter 14. Shelter Alpha 8. Erin, Olaf, and Jan had made it halfway back to room 17 before they were noticed. 2 of the Quarian guards spotted them as they turned a corner. I knew it, the sergeant snapped. Their spies, seize them. Run, Olaf said. They bolted to room 17 and slammed the door shut behind them before locking it. The guards began pounding on the door. What is going on? Hera asked. We may have sneaked into a control room, Erin said, and so maybe they now think we're spies. Hera glared at her. Yeah, I know sneaking around was stupid, but we were trying to keep Jan out of trouble. My bad, Jan said. But what do we do now? Outside, the sergeant was ordering security to break down the door. Erin could make out his commands through the door. We have to get out of here before we end up locked up, surviving on bread and water. Good thing I've found the air vent, Tom said. Tom had managed to open the vent and provided access to the duct beyond. They grabbed their belongings and climbed into the duct. Erin went in last. She had barely put the grate back in place when the door broke. Rackle had taken notice of the ruckus in the shelter. He had told Sergeant Kavar to stand down, that the children had simply been bold and curious. In short, they were being children. But the invasion and the insanity taking place on the surface had pushed the man over the edge. While Rackle yelled into the radio, Admiral Harash was giving his own orders. The people that had entered the Prothean ruins had been identified as defenders: Chief Zhukov, Avar, and Battlemaster Varrock Crag. Harash had managed to contact them, and they had explained why they were down in the ruins. So Harash was ordering the defenders not to attack them, but to go back them up. They had figured that if the Reapers made it down to the ruins, all would be lost. So there were only a few soldiers in the ruins. Still, any help he could send was better than none. Several meters below the lowest level of Shelter Alpha 8, Zhukov was following a trial. Bright purple light were leading them towards something. The lights had begun appearing as soon as they had entered the ruins. They weren't the only thing that was different. Force field blocked passages, doors were closed and locked, and automatic turrets were ready to fire. "This whole place is ready for a last stand," Crag said. "I'm just glad it's not shooting at us." Avar said. They reached the end of the trail, which was an elevator. Zhukov pressed the button, and the platform raced down. SSV Ain Jalut. Mandy Jones was talking to her counterpart on the El Alamein, a comm operations chief called Ayers. Her instinct were telling her that this was the captain's brother, but she had a job to do. So she didn't ask. Next to her, Farka was dealing with a serviceman who was on the edge of hyperventilating. Harris appeared next to Farka without a sound. "Sorry, once a Marine, always a Marine," he said with a smile. "How are we doing here?" Farka typed something into an electronic pad, which she handed to Harris. He read the text, which said, "Jones had gotten the hang of it, she's doing fine." Her counterpart on the Verdun is about to have a full-blown nervous breakdown, needs to be relieved ASAP. Harris only nodded and passed the pad on to Ayers. Like him, she only nodded in reply. Because of now, they had bigger issues. They had eliminated all the Reapers in space, but things were far from going well. Dreadnought 2 had been severely damaged and was being evacuated, and the Reapers down on the surface were doing major damage. All the scout ships had been shot down and husks were swarming all over the surface. "What about the Bellerophon?" Rodriguez asked. "Crashed. Looks like she survived the trip down but didn't make it back into orbit." Harris said. "Find the Reaper closest to Zhukov's position and start shooting at it," Ayers said. "Aye, Skipper," Rodriguez and Harris said in unison. Seconds later, Ain Jalut dove into the atmosphere. Street, New Rannoch. Harry Tyler put 3 rounds into the nearest husk and signaled all clear with his left hand. Bellerophon had tried to climb back into orbit, but the Reapers knew that they had dropped Crag and his fellow Krogan, and they were not taking it well, so they had shot the freighter down. Da had broken her arm in the crash, but nobody had been killed. With Da's injury, Tyler had taken charge. "I can see why he's such a respected captain," Da said as Maria Henderson treated her arm. "He hasn't flinched even once since this whole mess started." They were in what was left of a bank. Tyler was preparing for a push towards the area secured by the Krogan. Henderson had been the ship's doctor of the MSV Endeavour before she was destroyed. The Tylers have been fighters since the American War of Independence. Harry's survived scrapes with pirates and mercenaries. "Okay, folks," Tyler began. "Here's the plan. We have 3 assault rifles. Those will be our tips of the spear. Pistols will go next, and our snipers will take up the rear and provide cover fire. Let's go." Somebody handed Da a pistol as Henderson finished putting her arms in a sling. She just hoped that they would have enough ammo to make it. Chapter 15. SSV Ain Jalut. Ain Jalut and her sister were hitting the Reaper with everything they had. The massive creature returned fire, but the ship dodged the laser beam. "We're doing plenty of damage, but the blasted thing is still walking," Rodriguez said. "How are we doing on Javelin missiles?" Zara asked. "Our supply is spent. El Alamein and Verdun used all of theirs to take out the one damaged one by the Helium-3 blast." "Sanders, can we spend people to drive the Mako?" Zara said into the intercom. "I can give Mbeki and Kepler, but where do you want to drop it?" Zara checked the scanners and spotted the perfect place to give the Reaper a nasty surprise. The Bellerophon crew had gotten stuck at a crossroads. It was swarming with husks, and while their coordinated fire was enough to keep the enemy at bay, it was not enough to break through. Then an Alliance ship came sweeping down. It was clear a frigate, but not a design that Da had ever seen before. The important part was that it opened a cargo bay door and a M35 Mako came roaring out. It didn't waste any time. riddling husks with bullets and cannon fire on the way down. Before the enemy realized what hit them, a second ship passed over and dropped another Mako. Between them, the two tanks put a serious dent in the enemy's numbers. "Grenades," Tyler ordered, before they regroup. 8 grenades detonated and everybody opened fire. It was now or never. "Vale, we need your Mako down there," Zara said into the communications console. "Agreed, but I've got a skeleton crew, so no driver and gunner." "Just drop it. She can take the fall," Rodriguez said. "If Dawes still alive, she'll take care of the rest. Will do." Verdun dove towards the site. Then she put her nose down and opened the cargo bay door. Gravity did the rest. The Mako tumbled end over end until 7 husks and the ground stopped her. "If they hadn't been zombified, that really would have hurt," Tyler said at the sight of the third Mako. "Think it'll still drive? It's a Mako. It's literally designed to be dropped from orbit and still drive." Daw said. Tyler grinned at that. The Mako had landed on its wheels, so he quickly found the entrance hatch and opened it. A minute later, the tank drove out of the crater she'd left in the street. Daw began giving orders. They needed to go. Prothean ruins. The elevator had delivered them to the lowest level of the ruins. Besides the elevator, the level only had one other room. Said room was sealed behind a heavy door. The Quarians had been able to open it. Zhukov, Avar, and Crag had just secured the lobby when 8 Quarians joined them. "Oh, good," Crag said. "At least we won't walk into whatever death trap is beyond that door alone." "We have to open the door first," Avar said. "Any ideas?" "We tried everything," one of the Quarians said. "Let's start with the basics," Zhukov said. He approached the door and it began to move. And then it jammed. He crouched and saw that the room beyond was covered in roots and vines. The space under the door was too narrow for him to crawl through. They were stuck. They had made it back to the sewers and from there into the Prothean ruins. Erin had to admit they were really creepy, but they were big and she figured nobody would look for them down here. "Why are we following these blue lights?" Lexa asked. "Do you want to go into the dark part of these ruins?" Olaf asked. "Good point," Lexa said, "but if we get eaten by something horrible, it's totally your fault." The lights led to an air duct that appeared to go straight to the bottom of the ruins. Lexa swallowed. "I knew it. I've seen this movie." "This is the part where we fall straight into the stomach of the monster and melt. That was a horrible movie," Jan said. "The script was corny and the effects were terrible." He climbed into the air duct. "I'll go first and prove it's totally safe. Cannonball." Jan pushed off and vanished down the vent. Zhukov heard something land with a thud beyond the door. Then a young voice yelled up an air vent. "It's safe. Nothing but vines and roots." More thuds sounded on the other side of the door. Zhukov waited until they stopped before speaking up. "Who's there?" he asked, keeping his voice calm and friendly. "Corporal Zhukov, is that you?" Olaf said. "It's us, Erin and Olaf." "Yes, how'd you kids get down here?" "It's a long story," Olaf began. "Can you help us open the door? It's jammed." He took out a flashlight and rolled it under the door. "Can you see what's wrong with it?" Olaf picked up the flashlight and turned it on. He spotted a big root and figured it was the problem, so he told Zhukov about it. "Can you break it?" "No," Olaf said. "It's too thick." Crag took out a large combat knife and slid it under the door. Erin swallowed, but picked it up and began hacking at the root. Olaf used the flashlight to allow her to see. It broke after the 5th chop, so they grabbed the root and pulled. It took all 8 of them, but a chunk of the root finally came out. The door didn't open all the way, but it came up far enough for Zhukov and his team to crawl under the door. "We should send them back to the surface," Avar said. "No, something tells me it's no coincidence they're here," Zhukov said. "Let's go, kids." Erin gave the knife back to Crag, while Avar gave her a flashlight. The soldiers all turned on the flashlight on their weapons. "Why are you carrying flashlights when you have them on your guns?" Carol asked. "They're spares," Avar began, "in case the other break or run out of power." They headed deeper into the room. It was a massive room full of stone columns, and then the displays began to light up. Dreadnought 1. Being Batarian, Kaimas had never believed in miracles. Until now, he hugged, yes, actually hugged Aram. The Salarian was stunned at first, but then returned the action. Dreadnought 1 was a mess. Her hull was breached, most her weapons were offline, and the crew was fighting fires all over the place. Dreadnought 2, however, was in even worse shape. And Captain Romer III was still alive, whereas Dreadnought 2 had lost her captain. Kaimas was overseeing the chaos that was Dreadnought 1's hangar bay. Well, until he had spotted Aram. He finally let go of his XO. "Did all the survivors make it off too?" Kaimas asked. "No, 3 chose to stay." Kaimas was about to ask why he saw the answer. The hangar door was open and he could see Dreadnought 2, including its burning engines. Kaimas felt his stomach drop as he realized what Dreadnought 2 was doing. He just hoped that the Reapers wouldn't see them coming. SSV Ain Jalut. Zara saw Dreadnought 2 enter the atmosphere and yelled an order to get clear into the communications console. The ship turned red hot as it headed for the surface at full speed. "It's a kamikaze run," Farka said. "I know," Zara said, and the hell arrived. Dreadnought 2 hit the Reaper she had targeted and her drive core breached. Buildings vaporized, air was heated to millions of degrees, plasma pushed outwards as radiation levels spiked. When the light faded and the dust began to settle, the Reaper was still standing. Farka gasped. Bloody hell. She began, before the Reaper keeled over. The Reaper's kinetic barriers and metal skin had protected it from the heat and physical damage. But the electromagnetic burst had fried its nervous system. The Reaper that Ain Jalut had been attacking had been outside the blast radius. But then something happened that the Reaper and the crew of the Ain Jalut didn't expect. The Reaper that had toppled over had fallen next to a power plant. Zara didn't waste any time and opened a channel to the plant. A nervous plant manager appeared on her screen. The man had insisted on staying at his plant with a skeleton crew. "Manager Lavar, can you power that Reaper laser up? We'll be lucky to get 1 shot, maybe 2, and I can't promise we'll hit anything. Let us worry about that. Ain Jalut out." Farka had seen this crew beat the odds before. And she got the feeling that they were already cooking up a plan to do so again. Chapter 16. Prothean's Ruins. The displays were holographic and in Prothean. Finally, the image of an alien appeared in the middle of the room. It was unlike any alien any of them had ever seen, but they could all understand it somehow. "I am Valiant, a Prothean VI based on Herrick Tikkar, the overseer of Project Capsule. Do you wish to trigger the Omega defense protocols?" "That sounds dramatic," Aaron said. "I vote for no." "Smart kid," Crag said. "I'm with her." "What are the Omega defense protocols?" Avar asked. "There are 3 protocols available." The room lit up as Valiant showed them what they were. Up on the surface, Regina Mbeki and David Kepler had just received order for Captain Ayer's newest crazy plan. They had managed to cram all of the Bellerophon crew into the 3 Makos, except the snipers. Those 2 crew members had insisted on staying out anyway. Traveling over the rooftops, they had found a shelter where the defenders could use reinforcements, so they had set up a nest and begun killing husks. The Makos had reached the Museum of History, leaving behind a trail of enemy corpses. "You know this plan is crazy?" Da asked. There were 5 people in Ain Jalut's Mako, which Kepler had nicknamed Bob. Bob was currently holding Mbeki, Kepler, Da, Barnaby, and Tyler. Barnaby smiled at Da. "Crazy plans are our specialty. Captain Ayers has put together an 8-team, except in space," Barnaby said. "And she loves it when a plan comes together," Kepler added. "Fine," Da said. "So how do we pull this off? Barnaby, you're with us. Da, you take charge of the defense here and make life miserable for the husks here." Mbeki said. "And me?" Tyler asked. "Find 3 volunteers and take the other 2 Makos to make a ruckus at that shelter the snipers found," Kepler said. "That should keep them distracted while we make our move." Da and Tyler got out of the Mako, while Mbeki planned their route to the power plant. Zhukov didn't believe what he had just heard. Before entering an ice age, the one that the Quarians had ended New Rannoch had been a Thoihan colony. The Thoihan had begun work on advanced defenses, which the Protheans had continued. But when the Reapers had attacked during the last cycle, they had been offline. The Quarians, however, had provided Valiant with the means to complete them. "So, what do we do now?" Avar asked. Zhukov turned towards the controls and began pushing buttons. SSV Ain Jalut. Rick McKinley had just swung them around for another pass at their target when it was encompassed in a bright green light. The Reaper was lifted off the ground. "It's a gravity well," Taylor said. "No, it's an anti-gravity well." The Reaper struggled, but kept accelerating. Taylor plotted its course and realized where it was going. "It's headed straight for the sun, Lieutenant." "Good, one less to worry about." There was the question of where the anti-gravity well had come from, but that was an issue for the captain and XO to deal with. McKinley had other things to worry about. Zara watched as Ain Jalut found a new target and swung around to attack it. Ella Lamine and Verdun followed her and hit the same Reaper. "What the hell just happened?" Harris asked. "Harash doesn't seem like the type to hold out on us, and the energy signature isn't Quarian either," Rodriguez said. "Try running it against Prothean energy signatures." Rodriguez worked his console and got back results that made him frown. "No match," he began, "but the well came from the Prothean ruins." "What if they're not all Prothean?" Mandy Jones said, getting her looks. "Well, who says the Protheans started from zero? We build stuff on top of their ruins. But if it's a cycle like Commander Shepard said, then some of the Prothean ruins would have to build things left behind by older civilizations," Harris said, "which we wouldn't have records on," Rodriguez said. "And thus the energy signature comes back as unknown." "Good thinking, Lieutenant," Zara said. She just hoped that whoever had been here before the Protheans had more tricks up their sleeve. The Reaper screamed as it fell into the new Rannoch star. They had known about the Thoihan colony and the defenses they had been building. But they had presumed those defenses destroyed after wiping out the Thoihan, until they discovered the Quarian colony. The Quarians had managed to finish the Prothean defenses, which highlighted the risk of them completing the Thoihan systems as well. Hence, the heavy attacks against the Prothean ruin access points, attacks that had failed. The Reaper's last thought was that these blasted creatures were only buying themselves time. He might not be around to see it, but they would win. Makos. Mbeki pushed the Mako to her top speed, while Kepler put the tank's machine gun to good use. "Almost there," Barnaby said. "Check in on the other Makos, Barnaby," Mbeki said. "Alpha to Bravo," Barnaby said as she activated her radio. "Status report, Tyler." Bravo and Charlie moving together. "On schedule and slaughtering husks like there's no tomorrow." "Good. Keep it up, Alpha out." They reached the power plant, where the Quarians had finished wiring up the Reaper, which left them facing a possible new threat. From what Commander Shepard had reported, Reapers could brainwash people. The process was called indoctrination, and there were reports that the Reaper being dead wasn't enough to stop it. The good news was that it took time, so if they move fast, they could make their move before it became a factor. Mbeki parked the Mako, and they got to work. Henry Smith had been the MSV Endeavor's security officer until the ship had been destroyed by the Reapers. Now, he was acting as gunner for Harry Tyler's Mako. Smith had been aboard the Endeavor for 8 years. Before that, he had spent 15 years as an Alliance Marine. So figuring out the Mako's gun had been easy. "We're approaching navigation marker 3, Skipper." "Good, we get through there and it's a straight shot to the shelter." Navigation marker 3 was a small square where 3 streets met, and it was swarming with husks. Time to get to work. Smith said. Both Makos opened fire. Chapter 17. Prothean Ruins. "Did you just launch a Reaper into the sun?" Aaron asked. They were still in the Prothean control room, but something had changed. Zhukov was working the controls, while Crag and the rest of the adults had set up a perimeter to defend the entrance. The children all had flashlights and knives, which they were using to attack the roots and vines all over the room. "Yes, we did, and the Reapers aren't going to like that," Avar said. Zhukov cursed in Russian as he tried to fire the well weapon again. "I just tried to do it again." but the system says there's not enough power. It appears the power source is a series of special power cells. Problem is, I can't transfer the power from the cells to the well projector. I think I've found it, Carol began. There's a big conduit under the floor here. If it's that important, I'd run it through here. Aaron and Olaf joined Carol and looked at the section of floor. It was a grate, allowing them to see that the conduit was badly overgrown, but they sounded wrong somehow. We're getting visitors, Avar said. Olaf and Aaron grabbed the grate and tried to lift it, but it was too heavy. The other children rushed forward and joined in. There was a hard crack as the grate opened. "We're in," Olaf yelled. The problem was, he got the feeling that the bad guys were too. On the surface, Da and the defenders at the Museum of History had been holding the line. And then the enemy stopped coming, which Da knew was a bad thing, so she had made her way to the museum's roof. What she saw made her curse. "Delta to Alpha, we have a problem." "I read you," Barnaby said over the radio. "What's wrong?" We were holding the line, and apparently so were the Quarians, because our Reaper friends just blasted their way in. "Roger that. Barnaby out." Da just hoped they would be able to execute the plan before the Reapers executed them. Several streets over, Henry Smith shot the last husk. They were through the square. Tyler pushed the gas pedal all the way down and they bolted for the shelter. Smith signaled the good news to Da and Barnaby. In return, Da told them about the Reapers breaching the ruins. He cursed, just as the Makos arrived at the shelter. There had been 12 defenders, but now they were down to 3. Tyler parked their Mako to the left, while the other Mako parked to right. Now, it was Tyler's turn to come up with a plan to hold the line. SSV Ain Jalut. Zara activated the radio and the intercom at the same time. Da had told them about the breach of the ruins. "We need to focus on the Reaper that made the breach." "Dreadnought 1 is in position to lay down fire," Kaimas said. "And we're on approach, Captain," McKinley said. "Elalamine has your back," O'Neill said. "And so does Verdun," Vale began. "How are we doing on Plan B?" "Almost done. All we need now is a target." As if on cue, the radio came to life. It was Maria Barnaby. "Plan B is ready for action, Captain, firing in 10 seconds." As promised, the downed Reaper fired a shot and hit one of the other Reapers. It managed to fire another shot, then there was an explosion. Zara cursed under her breath, then activated her radio. "Report, Barnaby, are you still with us?" "Yes, ma'am." But the Reaper apparently had safeties against Plan B. Checking the sensors, Zara saw that both shots had hit the mark. The Reaper that had made the breach was 2 tentacles lighter. It fell over. "McKinley, tell me you saw that," Rodriguez said into the intercom. "Yes, I did." "Lining us up for an attack run now, Commander." "Good," Zara said. "Hit it with everything we've got." Ain Jalut swung around and cut loose with all weapons she had, with Elalamine and Verdun following. As promised, Dreadnought 1 provided cover fire from orbit. Zara just hoped that whoever was in the ruins pushing buttons would be able to hold off the husks long enough to survive this mess. Down in engineering, Claudia Sanders was studying the sensor readings on the anti-gravity well. Something about the energy signature was off, but she couldn't put her fingers on what. "Come on, Claudia, what is missing from this picture?" She worked the controls to separate the elements of the signature. Then she rotated one of the elements, and it clicked together in her brain. The system was far from functional, and she got the feeling that it was more than just a simple catapult. Claudia worked the controls again, and then the sensors detected something they had not been able to see before. And what she saw now made her suspect that things were about to get very interesting down on the surface. Museum of History. Da heard a shout from one of the other defenders. She made her way to the museum entrance. Another wave of husks was incoming, and it was big. Clearly, Zhukov and Avar had hit an even bigger nerve than Da had thought. "Wait for it," she ordered. "Make sure your shots kill something." They waited until the husks were within range and then unleashed a hail of bullets. Dozens of husks went down, but they kept coming. Da cursed, but everybody kept shooting. "Grenades," Da yelled. "Cover people." 10 grenades went flying and the wave was thinned out again. And then it was completely wiped out. Da blinked and then looked up. What she saw made her smile. Prothean ruins. Zhukov, Avar, and Crag opened fire as soon as the first husks appeared. Down in the space under the floor, Aaron and the children were pulling roots like they were slaying a monster. Olaf put his hand on her shoulder. "I'm scared, Olaf," she said. "I'm really, really scared." "Me too," Olaf began. "But whatever happens, we're together." "Guys," Carol said, "I found something you need to see." Aaron and Olaf joined Carol. He had found a large nodule that was blocking what appeared to be a junction of some sort. "We clear that and something will happen," Olaf said. They began chopping at it. Chapter 18. Bravo and Charlie. Tyler and Smith could hear the husks coming before they saw them. The Verdun's Mako, Charlie, had been manned by 2 other Endeavour crew members. Paul Anders had been the chief engineer and Roger Vander had been one of Smith's security officers. "Anders, Vander, get ready to put those guns to good use," Tyler said. "Ready for action," Vander said. "We'll put them full of lead when you give the word." Anders was in Bravo while Vander was in Charlie. Both were manning their Mako's machine guns, but Tyler knew it wasn't enough. Even with 5 defenders and 2 snipers, so he would have get creative. "Come on, Harry, time to use that brain of yours," Smith said. Tyler looked at the street. The husks began to pour in and they opened fire. Then Tyler made his move. The street was a straight line towards their position. But it was far from level. The defenders were higher than the attackers, and that was what gave Tyler his move. Between them and the attackers were 2 fire hydrants. Tyler bolted and opened the first hydrant, causing a torrent of water. Several husks lost their footing, and Tyler followed it up with a frag grenade. The explosion bought him the time he needed to reach the second hydrant. He opened it, and more water flooded down the street. "Anders, Vander, time to use the mortar setting." Besides working as machine guns, the turrets on the Makos also had a mortar setting. Both Makos fired a single mortar shot, but not at the husks. Instead, they targeted a pair of electrical cables above. The cables snapped and physics did the rest. First, the cables came down. Second, the electricity arched, and the husks began falling. Prothean ruins. The nodule broke at last. As soon as it did, the children jumped away from the conduit. Aaron and Olaf put the grate back in place. "The conduit is beginning to glow," Aaron yelled. There were beeps and the holographic displays began to change, but the biggest effect was what happened at the entrance. The husks turned and bolted. "This is either really good," Avar said, "or extremely bad," Crag said. "Like the end of the world bad." Avar and Crag stayed at the entrance while Zhukov went to the controls. He began pushing buttons as he had before. Up on the surface, all the remaining Reapers were caught in anti-gravity wells, and that was not everything. All this time, the 2 Asari cruiser and the Tyrian ship had been exchanging fire with the last Reaper left in orbit. But the Reaper suddenly turned and bolted. Captain Rhea Hpar of the Asari cruiser Pyres wanted to chase it. She knew it was not really retreating. It was going summon a 3rd wave. But she also knew that if they picked this fight alone, they would lose. Not to mention that they had plenty of wounded and repairs to make. Which was her trying to keep the worst part at bay. They had lost good people, and this war was just getting started. Zhukov couldn't believe what he was seeing. The Reapers were gone, but he knew it was only a matter of time before more showed up, and the planet was still swarming with husks. "Defense system Omega-2 is now available in Bravo mode," Valiant said. "Warning, engaging Omega-2 in Alpha mode will also engage Defense Protocol Omega-1. The hologram paused as an image appeared next to the controls. "The Omega-1 countdown timer is currently set to 15 minutes. Aaron gasped when she saw the new image. "Is that what I think it is?" she said. "I think so," Olaf said. "At least if you're thinking what I think you're thinking." "Let's see what Omega-2 does first," Zhukov said. He pressed the buttons to trigger Omega-2. SSV Ain Jalut. Zara watched as the Reapers vanished into the sun, except for the one that was retreating. It was Harris who said what she was thinking. "You know they're going to be back, right?" he said. I know, but we can't chase it down. We have husks to deal with. Before Harris could answer, several of the monitor around CIC lit up. What the hell? Rodriguez said. These readings are off the charts. Is it the same energy signature as before? Yes, Skipper, but it's not the same system or subsystem, ma'am. Rodriguez pressed several buttons, and an image of the planet's sky appeared. It was as if there was a meteor storm in progress, and then she realized what the system was doing. It's a teleporter, Zara said. It's grabbing husks and beaming them to the edge of the atmosphere. And gravity does the rest, Harris said. These things are tough, but they can't survive re-entry. Sanders to Ayers. The intercom said, Can you come down to engineering? No, but I can send Singer. Please do. There's something he needs to see. Rodriguez left CIC. Zara got the feeling that Sanders had found something interesting, but she had her hands full. Sanders looked up from her console when Rodriguez entered. What have you got, Commander? He said. I've analyzed the energy patterns of the unknown energy down there, and from what I've seen, we've only seen half of what's down there in action, sir. Based on what? Well, the power come from cells that are charged by geothermal vents deep inside the planet's crust, sir. She punched up a map of the planet. It showed green lines representing power conduits and clusters of blue squares, which were the power cells. The conduits seemed to meet at the capital. I did the math, and those cells are holding a lot more power than what's been used so far. Maybe they were just building in redundancy. I've factored that in, sir. Otherwise, this grid would be even more overkill. My best guess is that there are at least 2 more surprise down there. Anything else? No, Commander. Rodriguez walked out of engineering. His instinct were telling him that the Reapers weren't going to like these surprises one bit. Bravo and Charlie. The electricity finally stopped arching. Tyler figured that a safety had tripped somewhere, but his scheme had worked. Dozens of husks had been killed. He was about to activate his radio when what looked an awful lot like teleporter energy started snatching up enemy soldiers. Tyler waited until the last one was gone, then went to close the 2 hydrants. He had just closed the second hydrant when Ain Jalut's Mako came up the street. Mbeki and Kepler climbed out first, followed by Barnaby. Nice work, Mbeki said. Looks like it over now. Emphasis on the for now. Barnaby said. Tyler thought Barnaby was right about that, but he didn't have time to get philosophical about it. They had work to do. Chapter 19. SSV Verdun. Verdun's briefing room was crammed to the brim. Zara was there to represent Ain Jalut. O'Neill had come over from El-Alamein, and Vale had handed his CIC over to Eric Kepler. Zara was sitting between her brother Red and Kaimas. Admiral Harash represented the colonists. Finally, Captain Rhea Hpar was the ranking Asari, and Captain Diane Kavar commanded the sole Turian ship in the mix. Harash had just finished briefing everybody on the Thoihan defenses when the intercom activated. Captain Vale, Kepler began. The last husks were just teleported, sir. We double-checked, sir. They're all gone. Good, Vale said. Any word from the Tavura? The Tavura was the other Asari cruiser. She was sitting farther out from the star to serve as an early warning system. No, sir. No sign of the 3rd wave yet. Keep an eye on it, Vale out. He turned to Harash. You were saying, Admiral, we've secured the breach into the ruins. We're setting up defenses at the Museum of History and in the corridors leading to the control room. Repairs to Dreadnought 1 are underway, and we're salvaging as many of the AA guns as we can. What about the Krogan? O'Neill asked. They've taken over the defensive position that Captain Tyler rescued. The rest are helping with the defense of the museum. What about your people, Captain Kaimas? Vale asked. I'm taking everybody down to the surface to help with the defense. All of the wounded have been transferred to a secure hospital in one of the underground shelters. We're going to make sure it stays secure. Vale nodded. He knew that Kaima's old boss, Area T-Loke, wasn't very forgiving, so he understood why Kaimas and his people weren't going home. Before the debriefing could continue, an alarm sounded. SSV El-Alamein. Jill Daw was back in uniform. Using an emergency war regulation, O'Neill had reactivated Daw and drafted her as Elamin's XO. His previous XO, Staff Lieutenant Andrea Haley, had done an excellent job, but Verdun was light on crew, including not having a navigator. So Da was taking over as Elamin's XO so that Haley could fill the navigator position on Verdun. Da entered Elamin's CIC and activated the intercom. Like on Verdun, an alarm had sounded. "What's going on, Smooth?" Oscar Taylor had come over from Ain Jalut to become Elamin's senior pilot. The only other crew change was that 2 ex-Bellerophon crew had volunteered to help Dr. Mulrooney in the infirmary. "Word from the Tavura, Commander. We have 12 Reapers on approach and 3 hours before they get here." Da cursed under her breath. 3 hours was not enough time. It looked like they were about to make their last stand. SSV Verdun. Verdun's CIC was buzzing with activity. Kepler and Haley were overseeing things. Tyla Farka had volunteered to take over running communications, and Vale had accepted. And she was not the only volunteer aboard. Harry Tyler and the remaining 18 Bellerophon survivors were now part of the crew. "Where's Tyler?" Vale asked Kepler. "He and Mr. Smith are taking care of things in engineering, sir." "Good." He turned to Farka. "We need to get everybody back to their posts." "I'm already making the necessary calls, Captain." Vale nodded and left her to it. Zara winked at Farka. Her instinct told her that Verdun was in good hands, which meant she could focus on the Ain Jalut. She knew that their chances of surviving the new wave of Reapers were not good, but she had no intention of going down without a fight. What bothered her was New Rannoch. Everybody aboard the ships who wore a uniform had known that they might be asked to sacrifice themselves when they put it on. And the civilian volunteers, including Kaima's people, all knew the score as well. But the planet's population, they hadn't signed up for this. The colonists were the people they were fighting for, and if they lost, all those people would be at the Reaper's mercy. Which Zara was certain these blasted space octopuses didn't have. She thought about Aaron and Olaf and was glad they weren't up here. Museum of History. Aaron and Olaf were sitting on a bench and watching as people were preparing the museum for another assault by the Reaper zombie soldiers. Somebody had finally talked Sergeant Kavar out of his insanity, so at least they didn't have to worry about being arrested. "They're coming back, aren't they?" Aaron asked. "Yes, and the chances of good guys winning aren't good. Unless they use the Omega defense." Aaron paused. "But you saw what those do. Their name translated to the last letter of the Greek alphabet for a reason. You think they're that desperate?" Aaron gave him a look. "Yeah, I think so too." He got to his feet and took Aaron's hand. In the chaos, it wasn't hard for them to enter the ruins. They made their way to the control room. A team was pulling roots and vines all over the place. Admiral Harash and Vice Admiral Rackle were studying the main control interface with Valiant's holographic form watching. "Aaron, Olaf, what are you doing here?" Harash asked. "We heard things," Aaron said, "and we know about the Omega defenses. Mr. Valiant showed us blueprints and numbers." "You want to know if we're going to use them?" Harash asked. "Imagine we swapped places, wouldn't you want to know?" Olaf asked. "It's a fair question," Rackle said. "And a difficult decision. Whatever you decide, you've got my support." Harash looked at the controls and pondered. The weight of the world was on his shoulders. He took a deep breath and made his decision. Chapter 20. SSV Ain Jalut. Zara entered CIC to find Rodriguez and Harris getting the ship ready for the next round of fighting. "Commander, Lieutenant, how are we doing?" she asked. "We're on schedule, Skipper," Rodriguez said. "And the Tavura is on her way back at maximum speed. She will be here in 30 minutes. "So why is it taking the Reapers a couple of hours?" "They don't know if we have more Thoihan surprises up our sleeve," Harris said. "So they're taking it slow, playing it safe." "Good thinking." Zara made her way to the galactic map. "Now we have to." That was when the light of a teleporter beam lit up the space. When it faded, Aaron and Olaf McKinley were standing in CIC. More teleporter beams followed. Hera, Lexa, Jan, Bart, Carol, and Tom were now in CIC as well. It was Rodriguez who spoke up first. "Aaron, Olaf, what's going on?" he asked. Admiral Harash activated the Omega-2 protocol, but he put it in alpha mode. But he reprogrammed it first. Aaron said. The Prothean VI scanned the ships in orbit and calculated how much people their life support could handle. More children were deposited by teleporter. It figured more kids would fit than adults. Okay, I'm afraid to ask, Harris began, but what does Omega-1 do? Aaron made a face. I wasn't at the briefing. I don't think that saying it here is a good idea, Aaron said. Rodriguez, you have the deck. Lieutenant, Aaron, and Olaf, we need to talk in the briefing room. Zara led the way to the briefing room. As soon as they were inside, Aaron took a deep breath. It's a cannon. Omega-1 is a really big cannon, she said. The actual device is in a pocket universe near the star. When the clock hits 0, the device will phase back into the main universe and start draining power from the sun. That's impossible, Harris said. Phasing technology is only theoretical. According to the Prothean VI, there was an anomaly here, which the Thoihan modified with their own technology. That's why they picked this solar system to begin with, Olaf said. So what exactly does this cannon fire? New Rannoch. Aaron and Olaf said in unison. That's why you didn't want to say it in CIC. It's a relocation engine. And there's no guarantee that it'll work, Zara said. The planet might not survive the trip. That's another reason they're relocating the children. They want to make sure that part of their culture survives. And even if it does work, they'll lose their friends, their homes, and their families. Olaf said. Plus, because this technology is ancient, Harris began, there's no way to predict how it will work and where the planet will end up. Question is, will it fire before the Reapers get here? Zara asked. She led the way back into CIC. It was time to go get some answers. 10 minutes later, Rodriguez was running scans. At the same time, Harris was overseeing getting the children settled. Zara was standing next to him and running scenarios in her head. Around them, CIC was buzzing as people continued doing their jobs. I've found the pocket universe. So what the plan? Rodriguez said. It depends on the math. We know it's going to draw power from the star, but how much? New Rannoch is a planet. To move it a signification distance, you would have to drain the whole thing. The math says the star will go supernova. And that's the best-case scenario. Sounds like I've got to have a conversation with the other captains. Zara headed back to the briefing room. SSV Ain. Marcus O'Neill listed as Zara Ayers explained what was happening. Like Ain Jalut, Ain had received a load of children by teleporter. It was Vale who asked what O'Neill was thinking. So, what's the plan? He asked. We wait until the Tavura gets here and is fully loaded. Ayers said. And then we bolt. We have to get these children out of harm's way. Marcus looked at the other captains. He was in his quarters, teleconferencing with the other captains. You know the admirals won't be happy that we lost access to the Thoihan technology, O'Neill said. Nothing we can do about it, Ayers said. I know, but somebody had to say it for the record. What about Dreadnought 1? This is your world, Captain Romer. Admiral Harash has already given us orders to leave with you. What are the chances of this working? Captain Rhea Hpar asked. We've crunched the numbers. About 60% in favor of the planet making it through. The largest question is not if the planet will survive the ride, but where it will end up. If it end up in a deadly enough environment. Ayers didn't have to finish the sentence, because they all knew that if New Rannoch ended up in the wrong place, it would be a death sentence. What about the rest of the Epsilon Nebula when this happens? Diane Cover said. How will it be affected? We don't know, Ayers said. We don't know if the Omega defenses and systems maintaining the shell are connected. The Turian captain nodded. It was O'Neill who made the final choice. Okay, retreat and evacuation it is. The link closed and Marcus headed back to the CIC. They would have get past the approaching Reapers. And it was not going to be easy. SSV Ain Jalut. They had 2 hours before the Reapers arrived. All the surviving ships were loaded to capacity and gathered in orbit. The Omega-1 device had phased into existence a little over 30 seconds ago. Look at that, Rodriguez gasped next to Zara. They were in CIC, watching the telemetry. The Omega-1 device was 3 enormous rings that were connected by spokes. It was sucking energy from the star like a sponge soaking up water. "How long until the device is charged?" Zara asked. 91 minutes and 42 seconds, Harris said. "Position of our Reaper visitors." One of the displays changed to show a map of the system. A red dot represented the Reaper formation. "Let's get this over with," Zara said. "Singer, give the order." "Aye, Skipper," Rodriguez said. "All units, execute Plan Alpha." The fleet broke orbit and went into FTL. Aaron and Olaf were sitting in the infirmary. The Quarian children were also there. Dr. Telos was giving them all a checkup. "You know she's just trying to distract us?" Jan asked. "I know," Olaf said, "but she's kind and means well, and she's a good doctor." That was when they felt the ship move into FTL. It wasn't a dramatic move, but they could feel the room tilt and then a slight jolt of acceleration. "How are we getting past those incoming Reapers?" Jan asked. "I don't know. But I'm worried that they'll see the cannon and fly faster to attack it before it can fire. Or worse, they could turn around and fly away to attack some other planet." Jan nodded. He wasn't a soldier and he didn't understand war, but he knew that Olaf was right. Then Telos finished her examination of the children. "You know what?" Telos said. "Let's ask the captain." "We can't just ask her," Aaron said. "She's busy running the ship, and she has a battle to think about. Don't worry, us doctors are good at getting answers out of captains." Telos walked to her desk and opened a channel to the CIC. Rodriguez had answered the call from the infirmary. He had muted the link and given Zara a look. "They're fair questions," he said. "And it's fair for the children to ask them. If I was them, I'd be terrified, Skipper." "Yeah, they are about to lose everything. Somebody has to give them some answers." Zara unmuted the channel. "I'll be right down, Dr. Rodriguez. You have the deck. It's going to be a while. Call me when we get close." "Aye, Skipper." Zara headed for the infirmary. She knew that Admiral Hackett would have things to say about her leaving CIC just before a battle. But the fact was that she'd deal with a ship full of terrified children. So she had a conversation to have. Chapter 21. Telos listened as Captain Ayers explained what was happening to the children. She calmly answered their questions. "The Reapers can't reach the Omega-1 device before it fires. Even their maximum speed is simply too slow. They would have to use their FTL drives, which would be really dangerous. Because as the device sucks power from the star, it causes the gravity to go wobbly." "Isn't that dangerous to us?" Carol asked. "Good question. But we are flying away from the star. The Reapers would have to fly towards it." "But won't the star go supernova if the cannon drains it?" Lexa asked. "Yes, it will. But the explosion will only move at the speed of light and we are already far away, so it won't be able to catch up with us. You are safe here." "So why don't the Reapers turn around?" Hera asked. "Because we know what the device does," Olaf said. "But they don't. And the only way to figure it out is to zombify somebody who does know what's about to happen. Which means that as long as escape and they don't invade before the clock hits 0, Aaron said. "Boom," Bart said, while making a gesture with his hands. "Goodbye, Reapers." "But where will new Rannoch end up after the cannon fires?" "We don't know," Ayers said. "Because this cannon is really old, we have no idea how efficient it is going to be." The room went silent as the children processed that information. Up in SIC, Rodriguez was doing the math. When they were still in orbit, there had been 2 hours between them and the Reapers. But now they were moving towards the enemy. 12 Reapers and 8 troop transports. The numbers Rodriguez got in his head weren't good. "Come on, Singer, keep your cool." He said if the Reapers had one major flaw, it was arrogance. So he hoped that they would be able to use that. 3 Normandy-class frigates, 2 Asari cruisers, 1 Turian cruiser, and the Ghost dreadnought. It would have to do. "Lieutenant, how are we doing?" "The heat sinks are empty." Harris said, "Lasers are fully charged. Good. Is the formation holding together?" "All 7 ships are on schedule. So you planning on rescuing the skipper for those children anytime soon?" "1 more diagnostics on the engines," he said with a snicker. "And then I'll rescue Zara from those children." "1 diagnostic coming up, sir," Harris said. 12 seconds later, the diagnostic came back. It was all clear. Rodriguez activated the intercom and made the call. The clock finally reached 5 minutes. Everybody was ready for the fight. "They're splitting formation," Harris said. "One is moving to intercept us. 2 are headed for the Omega-1 device. The troop transports and the remaining Reapers are heading to New Rannoch." Zara watched as the Reaper approached. They reached weapons range and scattered, while opening fire. The Reaper went after Dreadnought 1 first, but Captain Romer III had repaired the ship's engines and thrusters, allowing them to dodge the shot. They had considered trying to bolt past at FTL speeds, but then all the Reapers would come after them and they would escape the coming supernova. So they had dropped out of FTL to fight this battle. They fired the last few missiles they had at the Reaper. Alas, they didn't do much damage. "Time for Plan B," Zara said. "Send the signal." The Omega-1 device had been hidden in its pocket universe, but it hadn't created it or modified the original anomaly. That job had fallen to 12 satellites that had come out of phase with Omega-1 device. They were the Thoihan technology that Olaf had mentioned in the briefing room. Those units were normally controlled by the Prothean VI down on New Rannoch. The signal Ain Jalut had sent was an emergency override, along with coordinates. The coordinates of the Reaper. "Signal send," Rodriguez said. "The satellites are moving, Skipper. 2 minutes and 40 seconds until the trap closes. Hit them with everything we've got. We have to keep this thing distracted." "Aye, Skipper." The next 2 minutes were the longest in Zara's life, but in the end, the satellites arrived. The plan was working, because the Reaper was too busy trying to blast them to notice their arrival. They took up their positions, and there was an enormous burst of light and energy. It blinded the sensors for 28 seconds. When the sensors came back online, the Reaper was gone. "This is our window," Zara said as she activated the radio. "All ships, it's time to go. Back to FTL now." The fleet reformed and jumped back to FTL. Space. Inside a newly formed pocket universe, the Reaper called itself Lemurs. He blasted the Thoihan satellites that surrounded him to pieces with 1 shot each, but the bubble did not collapse, so he began emitting particles and things began to shift. Finally, he was back in the New Rannoch system. He scanned for his targets, but they were too far away to catch. Lemurs cursed in a long dead language. These blasted creatures would be crushed sooner or later. For now, he had a planet to help harvest. The clock hit 0. Ain Jalut and her fleet were headed for the shell at maximum speed as the Omega-1 device began to glow as if it was pure fire. And then it released all the energy it had soaked up. Space itself warped. It was like New Rannoch was surrounded by heat haze. Except the haze was made from green-yellow energy. And then New Rannoch was gone. The Reapers had still been on approach when the clock had run out. Before they could retreat, the New Rannoch star went supernova. The explosion wiped all the Reaper forces off the map. But Ain Jalut and her fleet were outside the blast radius. The Battle of New Rannoch was over. Epilogue. SSV Verdun. They had made it out of the Epsilon Nebula. None of the Reapers had. Lieutenant Commander Daniel Vale and Lieutenant Andrea Haley were running things in CIC, surrounded by a skeleton crew. Kepler and most of the crew were getting some much-needed sleep. "Commander," Haley said. "The Epsilon Nebula is collapsing. Looks like the satellites maintaining the shell have self-destructed." She paused. "Sir, shouldn't the supernova be pushing everything away?" "Yes, but remember that the supernova hasn't reached the edge of the nebula yet. And something happened here over 100,000 years ago, because that anomaly that the Thoihan modified had to come from somewhere. So the rules might not work as usual in the area that we used to call the Epsilon Nebula." "Exactly. If we survive the madness of this war, we're going to have to come back and get some answers. For now, we have a load of survivors to deliver to the Citadel." "Aye, Commander." Haley activated the intercom and began giving orders. SSV Ain Jalut. Aaron and Olaf McKinley were sitting in the mess hall. They were back to writing their report for Admiral Hackett. It was a good distraction as they headed back to the Citadel. "You know we're still going to have to deal with Mom and Dad?" Olaf asked. "After all this madness, that sounds like a picnic." Aaron said, "You think Admiral Hackett will read this report? He's in the middle of a war and New Rannoch has vanished. One problem at a time. Let's finish the report first." They continued working on their report. Next to them, Vara Tilos was sitting across from Thomas Rodriguez. "So what happens once we reach the Citadel?" Tilos asked. "First, we help the survivors settle on the station. That and we resupply, along with making any final repairs we need. After that, I don't know. It'll depend on our new orders from Admiral Hackett." "What about Dreadnought 1? "It no longer has a fleet to go back to, so where do they go?" "The skipper is making calls to get them into the Tyrian fleet. Apparently, she has several contacts that owe her favors. She'll make sure they'll land on their feet." Tilos nodded. She had a feeling that she would be here until the war ended, one way or another. And with Ayers and Rodriguez in charge of the Ain Jalut, she figured they would have fighting chance. SSV Ain. Marcus O'Neill was in his quarters, writing his report for Admiral Hackett when the bell rang. "Enter," O'Neill said. Jill Daw entered with an electronic pad in her hands. She offered it to O'Neill and he took it. "We finished crunching the numbers, Skipper," she began. "We've done our best guess. Tried calculating where New Rannoch ended up, but we've never seen anything like this before." "I know, Amazon. Let's see what we have." He checked the pad. The math said that the planet was probably not in the Milky Way galaxy anymore. Instead, it was located somewhere in the Sagittarius dwarf spheroidal galaxy. Well, Hackett is not going to be happy about this, but if they survived the ride, they are outside the mass relay network. And that means that they might have a fighting chance of not being found by the Reapers. "Good work, Amazon. Dismissed." Daw nodded and walked out. O'Neill sighed and then got back to working on his report. The battle was over, but the war was only beginning.